Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The secret without a name. The cold was biting, and the silence of Anchorage's streets at 2 a.m. felt unnatural. Amelia Mitchell pulled her coat tighter around herself as she hurried down a dimly lit sidewalk. The snow crunched under her boots, each step echoing in the stillness like an unwelcome intrusion. She shouldn't have been out here this late, but something about the call from Sophia Miller had made her stomach churn, a desperate voice pleading for help before the line went dead. Amelia's breath came out in visible puffs, quickening with every second that passed. Her gloved hands tightened around the strap of her bag as she turned onto Sophia's street. It was eerily empty, the kind of emptiness that didn't feel right even for a place buried deep in winter. Streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. The houses here were mostly dark, their windows staring blankly into the night, except for one, a faint light glowed behind closed curtains at the end of the block. That must be it, she thought, her heart pounding harder now. Sophia lived alone, always insisting she liked the quiet solitude of Anchorage winters. But tonight, there was no answer when Amelia knocked on the door. She tried again, louder this time, her knuckles rapping against the wood with urgency. "Sophia? Are you there?" Only silence greeted her, broken only by the distant hum of power lines swaying in the wind. She reached for her phone to call again, but just as her thumb hovered over the screen, she heard it a faint creak from inside the house. It wasn't enough to dismiss as settling wood, it carried weight, purpose. Amelia hesitated, then pressed her ear closer to the door. Another sound followed, softer but unmistakable, shuffling footsteps, moving away from where she stood. "Sophia?" she called again, her voice trembling. No response. Just the oppressive silence pressing back against her words. Then, without warning, the doorknob began to turn slowly. So slowly, it seemed deliberate. Amelia stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the icy steps leading up to the porch. Her pulse roared in her ears as the door swung open wide, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. There was no one there, not immediately anyway. But as Amelia forced herself to peer inside, she noticed something odd, a trail of wet footprints leading further into the house. They weren't hers. They couldn't be. She hadn't stepped inside yet. And they weren't fresh either, not entirely. Some parts of the prints gleamed with melted snow, while others looked older, partially dried and smeared as if someone or something had walked through days ago but left traces that refused to fade. Against her better judgment, Amelia stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit her instantly, though it brought little comfort. Something about the air felt wrong, stale, heavy, as if it hadn't circulated properly in weeks. She glanced around the living room, taking in the familiar clutter of books and photographs scattered across shelves. Everything seemed normal, until she saw the photo frame lying face down on the coffee table. She picked it up cautiously, turning it over. It was a picture of Sophia smiling brightly next to Jackson Cole, her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, depending on who you asked. Their faces were scratched out violently, gouges cutting through the glass like angry scars. A chill ran down Amelia's spine. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had done this deliberately, methodically. Before she could process what it meant, another noise caught her attention, a low scraping coming from somewhere deeper in the house. It sounded like nails being dragged along a hard surface, slow and rhythmic, punctuated by pauses that somehow felt more menacing than the sound itself. Amelia swallowed hard, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? That she broke into her friend's house because of some creepy noises? They'd think she was crazy. Instead, she moved cautiously toward the hallway, following the sound despite every instinct screaming at her to leave. The hallway was narrow, lined with family portraits that seemed to watch her as she passed. Each frame held a face frozen in time, eyes staring ahead as if waiting for something. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar, light spilling out from within. The scraping grew louder, closer, and Amelia realized it was coming from behind that door. Her palms were slick with sweat beneath her gloves as she pushed it open just enough to peek inside. What she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. The room was small, cluttered with boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. In the center sat a chair, and on the chair was Sophia, or at least what remained of her. Her body slumped forward unnaturally, head hanging limp as if her neck couldn't support its weight anymore. Blood pooled beneath the chair, dark and congealed, staining the hardwood floor. But the worst part was her face, or rather, the absence of it. Where Sophia's features should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin stretched, taut over bone. Amelia gagged, stumbling backward as bile rose in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. Instead, she froze, transfixed by the sight before her. And then, from somewhere behind her, a voice spoke softly, almost kindly. "You shouldn't have come." She spun around, heart hammering wildly, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the portraits still staring silently ahead. Yet the voice lingered in her mind, repeating the same phrase over and over. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come." Amelia backed away, tripping over her own feet as she tried to retrace her steps toward the front door. But the layout of the house seemed different now, distorted somehow. Doors that hadn't been there before appeared in the walls, leading to rooms she didn't recognize. Shadows shifted unnaturally, twisting into shapes that defied logic. She could hear whispers now, too, overlapping voices murmuring in tones too low to understand. Panic set in fully as she realized she was trapped. Every step she took led her deeper into the labyrinthine nightmare of Sophia's home. The air grew colder with each passing moment, frost creeping up the walls and forming intricate patterns on the ceiling. And always, the whispers followed her, growing louder and more insistent. Finally, she found herself in a room she didn't remember entering. It was larger than any other space in the house, impossibly so, with walls made entirely of mirrors. Each reflection showed a version of herself, but none of them matched the person standing in the center of the room. Some looked older, gaunt, and hollow-eyed. Others appeared younger, innocent, and terrified. One reflection wasn't even human. It was a twisted, monstrous figure with elongated limbs and a mouth full of jagged teeth. Before she could react, the reflections began to move independently, stepping out of the mirrors and surrounding her. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, and they all spoke in unison, their voices blending into a single cacophony. "You know the secret," they hissed. "You've always known." Amelia shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know anything," she screamed. But the figures only drew closer, their cold breath brushing against her skin. One of them reached out, its fingers brushing her cheek, and suddenly memories flooded her mind, memories that weren't hers. Images of Sophia, of Jackson, of secrets whispered in the dark, of a nameless thing lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting patiently for someone foolish enough to stumble upon it. And then everything went black. When Amelia woke, she was outside again, lying in the snow. The house was gone, replaced by an empty lot surrounded by trees. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fumbled to retrieve it, hoping desperately for some explanation. There was a text message from an unknown number containing only 3 words: "Tell no one." She stared at the screen, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Somewhere in the distance, she heard laughter soft, childlike, and utterly devoid of joy. Bell Witch haunted our house. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Adams, Tennessee, where the air carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The clock struck 8:45 p.m. as the Johnson family Mark, his wife Emily, and their 2 children, Jake aged 12, and Lily, who was 8, sat together in their living room. The house, an old Victorian-style building with creaky wooden floors and high ceilings, had been in Mark's family for generations. Its walls whispered secrets of the past, but none more chilling than what would soon unfold within its ancient halls. The night began innocently enough. Mark read aloud from a book while Emily knitted by the fireplace, her needles clicking softly against the backdrop of crackling flames. Jake tinkered with his toy train set on the floor, and Lily colored intently in her sketchbook. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, casting shifting shadows across the windows. It wasn't until the first strange noise occurred, a faint jingling sound, like that of a bell, that the atmosphere shifted dramatically. "What was that?" Lily asked, looking up sharply from her coloring. Her wide eyes darted toward the corner of the room, though nothing appeared out of place. "It's probably just the wind," Mark replied, forcing a reassuring smile despite the unease creeping into his voice. But the jingling continued, growing louder and more persistent. There were no bells in the house, nor any source that could explain the eerie sound. As it echoed through the room, each chime seemed to resonate deep within their bones, sending shivers down their spines. Emily dropped her knitting, rising quickly to investigate. She moved cautiously toward the window, peering outside into the darkness. Beyond the yard stretched a dense forest, its towering trees swaying gently in the breeze. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Yet, when she turned back to address the family, her words caught in her throat. Hovering just above the mantel of the fireplace was the unmistakable outline of a spectral figure, a woman cloaked in white, her face obscured by long, flowing hair. "Get away from me," Emily shouted, her voice trembling as panic surged through her body. The apparition vanished instantly, leaving behind only the lingering chill of its presence. But the jingling persisted, now accompanied by other unsettling sounds: footsteps pacing overhead, doors creaking open and shut, and whispers that filled the air like phantom voices. That night, sleep eluded the Johnsons. Huddled together in the master bedroom, they listened helplessly as the haunting grew increasingly aggressive. Objects moved on their own accord, drawers opening and slamming shut seemingly without cause. The bed shook violently beneath them, though no earthquake or storm accounted for the disturbance. And then came the most terrifying sound of a low, guttural growl emanating from the shadows, followed by laughter that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. Days passed, each one bringing new horrors. The family documented every incident, hoping to find some rational explanation for what plagued them. They consulted local historians, learning about the infamous Bell Witch legend, a malevolent spirit said to have tormented the Bell family in the early 19th century before vanishing into folklore. Some claimed the witch still roamed the countryside, seeking vengeance against those who dared disturb her resting place. Others dismissed the stories as mere superstition. Regardless, the parallels between the Bell Witch case and their own experiences were undeniable. Desperate for answers, the Johnsons reached out to paranormal investigators, inviting them into their home to conduct a thorough examination. Cameras and recording equipment captured phenomena beyond human comprehension: cold spots forming inexplicably, voices speaking in languages neither the family nor the investigators understood, and even physical manifestations of the entity itself. One particularly harrowing moment occurred during a seance when the table levitated briefly before crashing to the ground, splintering into pieces. Through it all, the Bell Witcher, whatever force masqueraded as her, seemed fixated on Lily. She became the target of its wrath, experiencing nightmares so vivid they left her screaming awake in terror. During one such episode, Lily described seeing a pair of glowing red eyes staring at her from the darkness, accompanied by the sensation of icy fingers brushing against her skin. When she awoke, her blanket bore scratch marks identical to those of clawed hands. As weeks turned into months, the family's lives unraveled further. Mark lost his job due to frequent absences caused by the disturbances, and Emily withdrew into herself, consumed by grief and exhaustion. Jake began acting out, lashing out at his parents and sister in frustration. Only Lily remained eerily calm, often speaking of the lady as if she were an old friend rather than a terrifying specter. This unnerved the others even more, raising questions about whether Lily possessed some form of connection to the entity. Eventually, the strain became unbearable. With nowhere else to turn, the Johnsons sought refuge in a nearby motel, abandoning their ancestral home to the mercy of the Bell Witch. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They relocated to another state, starting anew under assumed names, determined to leave the nightmare behind. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Mark found himself glancing nervously over his shoulder, searching for signs of movement among the shadows. Years later, the Johnsons rarely spoke of their ordeal. Though grateful for their escape, they couldn't shake the feeling that the Bell Witch hadn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Adams, Tennessee, her vengeful spirit lingered watching, waiting, ready to claim her next victim. The whisper that never opened. It was 3 in the morning when Lucas Bennett first heard the sound. A faint whisper carried by the icy wind that swept through the narrow streets of Los Angeles. The city was unusually quiet for a place that never slept, its usual hum of life replaced by an unsettling stillness. Frost clung to the palm trees lining the sidewalks, their leaves glistening under the dim streetlights. Lucas had been walking home from his late shift at the diner when he noticed it, the whispering that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, trying to shake off the chill that wasn't entirely from the cold. The whisper grew louder as he passed an alleyway between 2 old brick buildings. It sounded like words, but nothing coherent, just fragments of syllables that danced at the edge of understanding. His pace quickened, boots crunching against the frost-covered pavement. He told himself it was just the wind playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew better. Olivia Turner lived in apartment 3B of the building where Lucas rented his studio. She had moved in 6 months ago, and they had exchanged polite greetings in the hallway occasionally. But tonight, when Lucas finally reached his floor, he found her standing outside her door, her face pale and drawn. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. Something about her demeanor made Lucas pause. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice softer than intended. Olivia glanced at him, her eyes wide with something he couldn't quite place. Fear? Exhaustion? Both? She hesitated before answering, I keep hearing things." Her voice cracked slightly. Voices. Whispers. I thought maybe it was just my imagination. She trailed off, looking past him into the dark hallway. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard those whispers too. Without thinking, he said, "Me too. Tonight. Outside." Olivia's expression shifted from fear to something closer to relief, though her hands still shook. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. The warmth of her apartment enveloped him immediately, but it did little to ease the tension coiling in his chest. Inside, the room was small but cozy, decorated with mismatched furniture and soft lighting. A half-empty mug of tea sat cooling on the coffee table beside an open book. Olivia gestured for him to sit while she poured herself another cup. "Do you want some?" she asked, holding up the teapot. Lucas nodded, though he doubted anything could settle the unease growing inside him. As she busied herself in the kitchenette, he noticed the curtains were drawn tightly shut, despite the fact that no one would be able to see inside at this hour. The windows themselves seemed almost deliberately avoided. So Olivia began after handing him a steaming mug. "You heard them too, the whispers." It wasn't a question. Lucas took a sip of the tea. It tasted bitter, but he didn't complain. "Yeah, out there. They followed me all the way back here." He set the mug down carefully. "What about you? When did you start hearing them?" Olivia wrapped her fingers around her own mug, staring into its depths as if searching for answers. "A week ago. At first, I thought it was just stress or lack of sleep. You know how it is, working long hours, trying to make ends meet. But then it got worse." She looked up at him, her gaze piercing. "They started coming closer, louder. Like they were right behind me, even when I was alone in my apartment." Lucas swallowed hard. "Did you tell anyone? Call someone?" Olivia shook her head. "Who would believe me? My friends think I'm overreacting. My landlord thinks I'm making excuses to get out of paying rent next month." She let out a humorless laugh. "And honestly, who can blame them? If I hadn't heard it myself tonight, I might not have believed me either." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. Lucas glanced toward the window, where shadows flickered faintly against the drawn curtains. Was it his imagination, or did the air feel colder now? He turned back to Olivia. There has to be an explanation. Maybe it's some kind of electrical interference or, I don't know, plumbing noise? Even as he said it, the words sounded hollow. Neither of them believed it. Olivia leaned forward, lowering her voice. There's something else. Last night, I saw someone or something standing outside my window. Just a figure, barely visible through the frost. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. Her breath hitched. When I went to check, there was no one there. No footprints, nothing. But the feeling, it stayed with me. Like I wasn't alone anymore. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wanted to dismiss her story as paranoia, but the memory of the whispers he'd heard earlier lingered vividly in his mind. Have you tried leaving? Going somewhere else for a few days? She shook her head again. I can't afford to leave. And besides, she hesitated, glancing toward the window once more. It feels like it's following me. Wherever I go, whatever I do, it's always there, waiting. The weight of her words settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Lucas finished his tea, setting the empty mug aside. We should figure this out together. He said finally, whatever it is, if it's real, we'll find a way to stop it. Olivia gave him a small, grateful smile, but her eyes remained haunted. Over the next hour, they talked about everything they could remember. The timing of the whispers, any patterns or triggers, whether they had noticed anything unusual in their daily routines. The conversation helped distract them temporarily, but neither could shake the sense that they were being watched. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, sent jolts of adrenaline coursing through their veins. Eventually, Lucas realized he needed to get back to his own apartment. Reluctantly, he stood, thanking Olivia for the tea. She walked him to the door, her hand lingering on the doorknob. Be careful, she whispered, and if you hear anything again, don't go looking for it. He nodded, forcing a reassuring smile he didn't feel. You too. Lock your door tight. With that, he stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him. For a moment, he stood there, listening. The whispers weren't audible now, but the oppressive silence felt just as menacing. Back in his studio, Lucas locked his door and double-checked the windows. He debated calling someone, anyone, but who would he call? Who would understand, without dismissing him outright? Instead, he lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling as exhaustion slowly crept over him. Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of shadowy figures and unintelligible voices echoing endlessly in his ears. The next morning brought little relief. Though the sun eventually rose, casting weak light over the frost-laden city, the oppressive atmosphere remained. Lucas called in sick to work, unable to face the idea of leaving his apartment. Around noon, there was a knock at his door. It was Olivia, carrying a bag of groceries and wearing a nervous smile. I figured we could use some supplies, she said, stepping inside, and maybe staying together will help. Lucas didn't argue. Together, they spent the day researching local legends, urban myths, anything that might explain what was happening. They scoured forums, read articles, even dug into old newspaper archives online. Most of it was nonsense ghost stories and conspiracy theories, but one thread caught their attention. A user named Silent Watcher had posted about a series of disappearances in Los Angeles during the winter months over the past decade. The cases were unsolved, dismissed as runaways or accidents, but certain details stood out. Witnesses reported hearing strange noises before the victims vanished. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking near windows or alleys. The posts were vague, but the similarities were impossible to ignore. As evening fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The heater struggled to keep up, and both Lucas and Olivia found themselves bundled in blankets, huddled together on the couch. The whispers returned, louder this time, seeping through the walls like water. They exchanged panicked looks, hearts pounding in unison. Whatever it was getting closer. Desperation drove them to action. Armed with flashlights and makeshift weapons, a baseball bat for Lucas, a kitchen knife for Olivia, they ventured into the hallway. The whispers surrounded them now, forming a cacophony of disjointed sounds that clawed at their sanity. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted their movement. At the end of the hallway, the emergency exit stood ajar, frost creeping inward. Beyond it lay the fire escape, descending into darkness. Lucas hesitated, gripping the bat tightly. "Do we really want to know what's out there?" he whispered. Olivia didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the gap. Slowly, they stepped through, bracing themselves for whatever awaited them. The metal stairs groaned under their weight, each step echoing ominously in the frigid night. Below, the alley was shrouded in shadow, the streetlights casting long, distorted reflections on the icy ground. Movement caught the corner of Lucas's eye, a flicker, gone before he could focus. Then another, and another. Shapes darted between the buildings, fleeting glimpses of something humanoid, yet wrong. "Run," Olivia hissed, clutching his arm. They bolted down the remaining steps, slipping on patches of ice as they fled. Behind them, the whispers erupted into a deafening roar, filling the air with chaotic sound. Shadows converged, twisting and writhing like living smoke. Panic surged through Lucas's veins as he realized they were being hunted. They rounded a corner, breaths ragged, legs burning. Ahead, a familiar figure emerged from the darkness. It was Benjamin Hayes, a neighbor whose face they recognized, but whose name they rarely spoke. His expression was blank, his movements mechanical. He raised a hand, pointing toward an abandoned warehouse across the street. "In there," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You'll find answers." Without hesitation, they obeyed, bursting through the rusted doors of the warehouse. Inside, the air was thick with decay and dampness. Faint traces of graffiti adorned the crumbling walls, remnants of a forgotten era. In the center of the vast space stood a wooden crate, its surface etched with symbols neither of them recognized. Above it hovered a swirling mass of darkness, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. Olivia approached cautiously, her knife trembling in her grip. "What is this?" she murmured, reaching out. Lucas grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. "Don't touch it," he snapped. But it was too late. The moment her fingers brushed the crate, the world around them dissolved into chaos. Images flooded their minds, faces screaming silently, hands clawing at unseen barriers, voices pleading for release. The whispers coalesced into a single, thunderous command. Open me now." Lucas staggered backward, clutching his head as the vision overwhelmed him. Olivia collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I can't," she choked out. "I can't stop it." The darkness expanded, consuming the warehouse, swallowing everything in its path. Somewhere in the distance, Benjamin's voice echoed faintly. "You shouldn't have come here." And then, silence. When Lucas opened his eyes, he was alone. The warehouse was gone, replaced by an endless void. Whispers surrounded him, louder than ever, pressing against his skull until he thought it might burst. He screamed, but no sound escaped. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him completely was the crate, floating impossibly in the emptiness, its lid inching open. Somewhere in Los Angeles, the sun rose again, frost melted from the trees, and life resumed its usual pace. But in apartment 3B, the curtains remained drawn and the whispers continued, waiting for their next listener. La Llorona drowned my sister. It was a humid summer evening in the small town of Rio Vista, where the air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine. The clock read 9:30 p.m. as Emily Carter sat on her porch, fanning herself against the sticky warmth that refused to dissipate even after sunset. Her younger sister, Lily, played nearby with a group of neighborhood children, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets lined with towering oak trees. Unbeknownst to them, the tranquility of this moment would soon shatter into chaos. The Carters lived in a modest house near the banks of the Rio Vista River, a winding waterway that had been both a source of life and legend for generations. Tales of La Llorona, the weeping woman said to haunt riversides searching for her lost children, were whispered among locals, though most dismissed them as mere folklore. Emily, however, had always felt an inexplicable unease whenever she heard those stories. That night, her instincts screamed louder than ever before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Emily noticed something odd about the river. Its usually calm surface rippled unnaturally, as if stirred by an invisible hand. A faint mist began to rise, curling lazily toward the shore like tendrils of smoke. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the humidity, but then came the sound a low, mournful wail carried on the breeze, haunting and otherworldly. It sent shivers down her spine, and she instinctively called out to Lily, urging her to come inside. "Lily, time to head home," Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the twilight. The children paused their game momentarily, glancing toward the house. But instead of obeying, Lily hesitated, drawn to the edge of the riverbank by some unseen force. "Just one more minute," she pleaded, her eyes wide with curiosity. Emily frowned, sensing the growing tension in the air, but reluctantly agreed, promising to keep a close eye on her. Minutes later, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The sky darkened prematurely, clouds rolling in with unnatural speed, blotting out the stars and moon. A cold wind swept through the area, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay, unlike anything Emily had ever smelled before. The laughter of the children faded into silence, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed down on everything around them. And then, from somewhere beyond the tree line, came the sound again, this time clearer, closer, and unmistakably human. "Miss Hijos! Miss Hijos!" cried a voice, high-pitched and filled with anguish, reverberating through the night. The words echoed in Spanish, translating to my children, each syllable dripped with sorrow, yet beneath it lay a menace that made Emily's blood run cold. She turned sharply toward the river, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. There, standing knee-deep in the water, was a figure cloaked in white, a woman with long, tangled hair that obscured her face, her arms outstretched as if beckoning someone forward. "Lily!" Emily screamed, lunging toward her sister just as the child took another step closer to the edge. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, Lily slipped into the murky depths of the river, vanishing beneath the surface without so much as a splash. Panic surged through Emily as she dove in after her, fighting against the current that seemed stronger than any natural force. Beneath the water, she saw shapes moving, sinister figures with hollow eyes and skeletal hands reaching out to drag her deeper. Somehow, Emily managed to claw her way back to the surface, gasping for air as tears streamed down her face. She searched frantically for any sign of Lily, calling her name over and over until her voice cracked from exhaustion. But there was nothing, no movement, no response, only the eerie silence broken occasionally by the distant echo of La Llorona's cries. Hours passed as searchlights scanned the riverbanks and divers combed the waters, hoping against hope to find Lily alive. Days turned into weeks, and still, no trace of the little girl emerged. The community mourned alongside the Carter family, offering condolences and sharing their own tales of encounters with La Llorona. Some claimed to have seen her wandering the riverbanks at night, her ghostly form illuminated by the pale light of the moon. Others spoke of hearing her cries during storms, warning people to stay away from the water. For Emily, the guilt became unbearable. Every night, she dreamed of that moment, the icy grip of the river pulling her under, the skeletal hands grabbing at her ankles, and the hollow eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She began hearing things, too soft whispers in the dead of night, footsteps outside her bedroom window, and sometimes faint giggles coming from the direction of the river. Each sound drove her further into despair, convincing her that La Llorona wasn't done tormenting her family. Months later, when winter settled over Rio Vista, bringing with it biting winds and frost-covered branches, Emily decided she couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a determination born of desperation, she ventured to the riverbank late one night, determined to confront whatever entity had taken her sister. As she stood there, trembling in the cold, she finally saw her clearly, the woman in white, her hair flowing like ink across her shoulders, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of grief and rage. "Why did you take her?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying her with eyes that burned like embers. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, its translucent fingers brushing against Emily's cheek before retreating into the mist. In that instant, Emily understood the spirit hadn't acted out of malice. It had mistaken Lily for one of its own lost children, drawn by the innocence and vulnerability all children share. Though the revelation brought some measure of closure, it did little to ease the pain of losing her sister. Emily continued to visit the riverbank, leaving offerings of flowers and candles in hopes of appeasing the restless soul that haunted its waters. Over time, the sightings of La Llorona diminished, as if the spirit had found peace or perhaps simply moved on to another place where unsuspecting victims wandered too close to the edge. Even now, years later, Emily carries the memory of that night with her wherever she goes. Every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seems most still, she hears the faintest whisper of a child's laugh or feels the chill of unseen breath against her neck. And though she tells herself repeatedly that it's over, deep down, she can't help but wonder if La Llorona is still out there watching, waiting, searching for her next child to claim. Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The customer who never left the store. The cicadas were louder than usual that summer night in Charleston, their rhythmic buzzing weaving through the thick humidity that clung to every surface. Lucas Allen stood behind the counter of his small convenience store on King Street, absently wiping down the already spotless glass display case. The neon open sign flickered slightly in the window, casting an uneven glow across the rows of snacks and beverages lining the aisles. It was nearly midnight, and the usual Friday crowd had already come and gone, leaving only the persistent hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of traffic from the historic district. Lucas checked his phone for what felt like the 100th time that evening. No new messages, just another quiet night in a city that never truly slept. He sighed and glanced at the security camera monitors mounted above the cigarette rack. Each screen showed a different angle of the store's interior, all empty except for his own reflection in the convex lenses. Something about tonight felt different though, like the air itself was heavier than normal. His eyes lingered on the darkest corners of the footage before moving back to the register. The bell above the door jingled softly, making Lucas look up with automatic politeness. A woman stepped inside, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere of the shop. She wore a long coat that seemed inappropriate for the sweltering July heat, its dark fabric hanging loosely around her thin frame. Her face was partially obscured by stringy blonde hair that caught the fluorescent light in strange ways, as if it didn't quite belong there. Lucas noticed how her shoes made no sound against the tiled floor. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, his voice carrying just a touch of professional warmth. The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she moved slowly toward the back of the store, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as she examined the shelves. Lucas watched her reflection in the glass refrigerator doors. Something about her movements seemed off, almost mechanical. Charlotte Robinson pushed her cart down aisle 3, debating between chips and pretzels. She paused when she realized the woman in the dark coat hadn't moved from where she'd been standing for the past 10 minutes. The stranger was now facing the wall, one hand resting on the metal shelving unit. Charlotte cleared her throat softly as she passed, but the woman didn't acknowledge her presence. There was something unsettling about the way her fingers curled around the edge of the shelf, knuckles white against the dull metal. Lucas finished counting the drawer for the 3rd time, the numbers blurring together in his mind. The woman still hadn't approached the register. He could see her in his peripheral vision, standing in the same spot near the snack aisle. Occasionally, he'd hear the soft rustle of her coat, though he couldn't be sure if she was actually moving anything from the shelves. The store's lights seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows across the floor. When he looked directly at her, she appeared perfectly normal, just another customer browsing late at night. But whenever his attention shifted elsewhere, he could feel her watching him. Amelia Mitchell entered the store 20 minutes later, her nurse's scrubs still damp from walking through the humid night air. She needed headache medicine after her double shift at Roper Street Francis Hospital. The first thing she noticed was the temperature. It felt several degrees colder inside than it should have been. Then she saw the woman in the dark coat standing near the beverage coolers. Something about her posture seemed wrong, like she was leaning into the glass without actually touching it. Amelia grabbed her medicine quickly, avoiding eye contact as she approached the register. The transaction took longer than necessary. Lucas kept glancing at the security monitors, noting how the woman's position never changed despite the passage of time. On the cameras, she appeared as a dark smudge against the bright colors of the snack aisle, her features indistinct even in high definition. When he finally looked up from the register, Amelia was already gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of hospital-grade soap. The cicadas outside seemed louder now, their song almost frantic against the glass windows. Charlotte decided she needed to leave. The woman had started humming softly, a tune that sent shivers down her spine, though she couldn't place why. As she approached the register, she noticed something peculiar. The floor tiles beneath the woman's feet looked newer than the rest, as if they'd been recently replaced. The grout lines were cleaner, the pattern slightly misaligned with the surrounding area. Lucas rang up her purchase without speaking, his hands trembling slightly as he handled the cash. Neither of them acknowledged the figure still standing silently among the snacks. The clock ticked past midnight. Lucas began his closing routine, straightening displays and checking expiration dates. The woman remained in her spot, seemingly unaware of the store's operating hours. When he finally mustered the courage to approach her, she turned toward him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be leaving soon," she said, her voice carrying an odd echo despite the carpeted floor. Lucas nodded and returned to the register, though his heart pounded in his chest. Something about her statement felt more like a warning than an assurance. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen the woman before. During her walk home, fragments of memory surfaced. A patient years ago who had died in room 312, her body found cold and alone after the night staff failed to check on her. The details matched too perfectly. The dark coat, the stringy blonde hair, the way she stood so still, it was easy to forget she was there. Amelia quickened her pace, the streetlights casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her from every direction. Back at the store, Lucas prepared to lock up. The woman was still there, now examining the lottery tickets with unnatural focus. Her reflection in the glass case showed details that shouldn't have been possible, her eyes too large, her mouth moving, though no sound emerged. When Lucas announced the store was closing, she simply nodded and walked toward the back exit. The security cameras captured her movements perfectly until she reached the threshold, then suddenly she vanished from all screens simultaneously. Charlotte lay awake in her apartment on Queen Street, unable to stop thinking about the encounter. The humming had lodged itself in her mind, repeating endlessly like a broken record. She pulled out her phone and searched recent news articles, finding nothing unusual about the convenience store or its employees. Yet when she scrolled through the business's social media page, she noticed something strange. In every photo taken inside the shop, the same dark figure appeared in the background, always partially obscured, but unmistakably present. Lucas locked the front door and set the alarm, his hands shaking as he worked. The back exit showed no signs of forced entry or recent use. The woman's absence felt heavier than her presence had been. As he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The parking lot lights buzzed faintly overhead, attracting clouds of insects that cast dancing shadows across the asphalt. When he glanced back at the store windows, he saw her standing exactly where he'd left her, staring out with an expression he couldn't read. Amelia called in sick the next day, unable to face the memories flooding back with each passing hour. She researched the store's history, discovering it had been built on the site of an old boarding house that burned down decades ago. Records mentioned a woman who had disappeared during the fire, her body never found among the charred remains. The description matched the figure from the store perfectly, right down to the humming that witnesses claimed they could still hear on quiet nights. The following evening, Lucas arrived for his shift to find everything exactly as he'd left it. The security footage showed 14 hours of empty aisles and silent registers. Yet, when he reviewed the previous night's recording, there she was again, appearing in the snack aisle as if she'd never left, moving with purpose toward the back of the store. The timestamp confirmed she'd been there the entire time, invisible to everyone except through the unblinking eyes of the cameras. Charlotte couldn't stay away. Something compelled her to return to the store to confront the mystery that had taken root in her thoughts. When she entered that night, the air felt colder than before, and the humming was louder, vibrating through her bones like a tuning fork. The woman stood in the same spot, surrounded by products that seemed to decay faster than they should. Their expiration dates read months in the future, yet their packaging was faded and brittle, as if time itself bent around her presence. Lucas began documenting everything. He kept detailed notes about each encounter, noting patterns in her behavior and appearance. The woman never spoke unless directly addressed, and even then, her responses were cryptic and often nonsensical. Yet, she seemed to know intimate details about each person who interacted with her, childhood memories Charlotte had forgotten, medical cases Amelia thought she'd kept confidential, personal struggles Lucas had never shared with anyone. The knowledge hung in the air like a threat, preventing them from seeking help. The city continued its usual rhythm around them, oblivious to the supernatural phenomenon unfolding on King Street. Tourists snapped photos of the historic district, capturing streaks of darkness in their pictures that they dismissed as lens flares. Locals complained about power fluctuations in the area, their clocks running minutes fast or slow without explanation. The cicadas grew louder with each passing night, their song taking on an almost musical quality that matched the woman's haunting melody. Amelia discovered other victims during her research, people who had encountered similar figures in different locations throughout Charleston's history. Each story followed the same pattern. A mysterious woman appearing in places of commerce, lingering beyond reason, collecting pieces of people's lives until they became trapped in her orbit. Some claimed she was searching for something specific, others believed she fed on human connection. All agreed that once she marked you, there was no escaping her influence. Lucas found himself changing. His reflection in the store windows seemed less substantial, his features fading slightly each day. Customers commented on how tired he looked, though he slept better than he had in years. The security cameras captured moments when he wasn't entirely present, his form flickering like static between frames. The woman watched these transformations with apparent satisfaction, her humming growing more complex, as if composing a symphony only she could hear. Charlotte's friends noticed her withdrawal from social activities. She spent hours sitting in her apartment, staring at the convenience store's security feed she'd hacked into. The woman's movements created patterns that resembled ancient symbols when traced over time. Mathematical equations formed in the spaces between appearances, suggesting a logic behind the madness. Yet each revelation came at a cost, fragments of Charlotte's personality chipped away, replaced by an understanding she couldn't articulate. The temperature in the store dropped steadily, creating condensation on the windows that spelled out words when viewed from certain angles. "Help me" appeared repeatedly, though none of them could determine if it was a plea or a command. The refrigeration units malfunctioned constantly, their contents freezing solid regardless of settings. Products aged rapidly on the shelves, some turning to dust within hours of stocking. Time itself seemed to warp around the woman, bending reality to accommodate her presence. Amelia's dreams became vivid and disturbing. She found herself wandering through endless aisles of forgotten stores, each one containing the same dark figure waiting patiently. The humming followed her into consciousness, becoming a constant companion that drowned out other sounds. Her colleagues at the hospital remarked on her improved intuition regarding patient care, though they couldn't explain how she knew things she shouldn't. The line between her world and the woman's realm blurred until she couldn't tell which side she belonged to. Lucas attempted to break the cycle by staying away from the store. For 3 days, he avoided King Street entirely, hoping distance would sever the connection. Instead, the woman's influence grew stronger. She appeared in his apartment mirror, reflected in puddles during rainstorms, visible in the steam rising from his morning coffee. The humming never ceased, matching his heartbeat until he couldn't distinguish between internal and external sounds. His attempts to warn others fell on deaf ears, their faces blank as if seeing through him. Charlotte documented everything obsessively, filling notebooks with observations and calculations. The patterns revealed themselves gradually, forming a complex web of connections between victims across generations. Each person had experienced loss or isolation significant enough to create a void the woman could fill. They had sought comfort in material possessions, believing wealth or convenience could replace human connection. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were all customers who had never truly left the store, trapped by their own desires. The final confrontation occurred on the hottest night of the summer. The cicadas screamed in harmony with the humming, their combined song shaking the glass in the store's windows. Lucas, Charlotte, and Amelia found themselves drawn back to the convenience store despite their efforts to resist. The woman waited for them in aisle 3, her dark coat billowing as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. Her smile revealed too many teeth, each one gleaming like polished stone. "You've learned," she said, her voice resonating through the empty store. But learning isn't enough. The floor tiles beneath them shifted, revealing the foundation of the old boarding house. Charred wood and ash filled the space where modern construction should have been. The security cameras captured everything perfectly, broadcasting their final moments to empty monitors throughout the building. One by one, they stepped forward, unable to resist the pull any longer. The store remained open for business the next day. New employees arrived, unaware of the previous staff. Customers browsed the aisles, selecting items they didn't need but couldn't refuse. In the security footage, dark figures moved among the shelves, their forms becoming clearer with each passing night. The humming continued, growing louder with each new victim drawn into its melody. And in aisle 3, the woman waited patiently, collecting souls who had forgotten what it meant to truly leave. Wendigo's screams echo in the woods. It was late in the evening, around 9:15 p.m., when the first scream echoed through the dense pine forest surrounding Lake Hollow, a small community nestled deep within the northern woods of Wisconsin. The air was cold and still, with a biting frost that clung to every breath exhaled. Inside their cozy cabin on the edge of the lake, the Anderson family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their 2 children, 10-year-old Jake and 7-year-old Lily, were settling down for the night after a long day of hiking and fishing. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls, while the soft hum of crickets filled the silence outside. Jake sat cross-legged on the floor, engrossed in a book about Native American folklore, his eyes wide with fascination as he read aloud to his younger sister. "Did you know," he began, his voice tinged with excitement, "that some tribes believe in a creature called the Wendigo? It's supposed to be this monstrous being that lives in the woods and feeds on people who wander too far from home." Lily giggled nervously, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "That's silly," she said, trying to mask her unease. "There's no such thing as monsters." Mark and Emily exchanged glances, amused by their children's banter, but little did they know how wrong Lily would soon prove to be. As the family prepared for bed, the atmosphere shifted subtly. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a chill through the room that seemed to linger longer than it should have. Emily paused mid-step, her hand resting on the doorknob leading to the porch. "Did you hear that?" she asked, turning toward Mark. He frowned, straining his ears to listen. At first, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the forest at night, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. But then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, came a sound that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up, a low, guttural growl, followed by what could only be described as a blood-curdling scream. The family froze, staring at one another in stunned silence. "What was that?" Lily whispered, clutching her mother's leg tightly. Mark grabbed a flashlight from the counter and stepped cautiously toward the window, peering into the darkness beyond. The forest appeared eerily still, its towering trees standing like silent sentinels guarding secrets unknown. Yet, despite the apparent calm, something felt off wrong even. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that prickled against their skin. "I'm going outside to check," Mark announced firmly, his voice steady but masking the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. "Stay here with the kids," he instructed Emily, handing her the flashlight before grabbing a sturdy wooden bat leaning against the wall. Reluctantly, he opened the door, stepping onto the porch where the cool night air wrapped around him like a shroud. The screams had stopped, replaced by an unsettling quiet that pressed against his eardrums. Shining the flashlight beam into the distance, he scanned the perimeter, searching for any sign of movement. At first, nothing stirred. Then, without warning, a pair of glowing yellow eyes emerged from the shadows, reflecting the light like twin lanterns in the dark. Mark stumbled backward, nearly dropping the bat as sheer terror gripped his body. Whatever stood before him wasn't human, it was impossibly tall, its skeletal frame towering over him, and its skin stretched tautly over protruding bones, giving it a gaunt, emaciated appearance. Its mouth gaped wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained crimson, and from its throat issued a chilling roar that reverberated through the forest, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. Emily screamed inside the cabin, waking the children, who now huddled together in fear. "Dad," Jake shouted, tears streaming down his face as he pressed himself against the wall. Through the window, they watched helplessly as Mark fought desperately against the creature, swinging the bat with all his might. Each strike connected with a sickening crunch, yet the Wendigo barely flinched, its movements fluid and predatory as it closed in on him. Inside, Emily grabbed a hunting knife from the drawer, her hands trembling as she prepared to defend her family. "Stay close," she whispered to the children, her voice breaking slightly. Together, they barricaded themselves behind overturned furniture, their hearts pounding wildly in unison. Outside, the battle raged on, the Wendigo's roars mingling with Mark's grunts of exertion. Finally, with one last desperate swing, Mark managed to drive the creature back, allowing him just enough time to retreat inside and slam the door shut. Once safely inside, the family gathered in the center of the living room, breathing heavily as adrenaline coursed through their veins. "We need to leave," Mark declared, his voice firm despite the fear evident in his eyes. Now, grabbing their belongings, they piled into the car parked out front, driving away from the cabin as quickly as possible. Behind them, the Wendigo's screams echoed through the woods, growing louder and more menacing with each passing mile. For hours, they drove aimlessly, seeking refuge in a nearby town. Along the way, strange occurrences plagued their journey, objects moving inexplicably within the car, whispers echoing through the radio speakers, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures darting across the road ahead. By dawn, they reached safety, collapsing into motel beds, exhausted but grateful to have survived the night. In the days that followed, the Andersons spoke sparingly of their encounter, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding their lives elsewhere. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seems most still, Mark finds himself glancing nervously out the window, searching for signs of movement among the trees. And though he tells himself repeatedly that it's over, deep down, he can't help but wonder if the Wendigo is still out there, watching, waiting, stalking its next prey. Next story. What happened in Black Hollow Woods? Everyone who enters disappears. I've always been drawn to mysteries. Ever since I was a child, I've had this insatiable curiosity about things that couldn't be explained, things that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and left me staring out windows late into the night. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in Black Hollow Woods. It started with my sister, Clara. She wasn't just family, she was my best friend. We shared everything, the secrets we kept from our parents, the dreams we whispered under the covers when we thought no one else was listening. And then she vanished. Just like that. Clara disappeared 3 years ago. One day, she went hiking alone near the edge of Black Hollow Woods. She never came back. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no body ever found. The authorities treated it as an isolated incident at first, but the more I dug, the more I realized hers wasn't the only disappearance tied to those woods. The locals call them Black Hollow Woods, though they rarely speak of them unless you press hard enough, and even then, their answers are vague, tinged with fear. They say it's cursed. Some claim it's haunted. Others believe it holds something ancient, something older than time itself. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain: anyone who enters doesn't come out again. Or if they do, they're never quite the same. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all superstition. After all, how could a foresta, place filled with trees and dirt and wildlife, be responsible for so many disappearances? But the more stories I uncovered, the harder it became to dismiss them as mere coincidence. People talked about hearing voices in the woods, seeing lights flicker through the trees at night, or feeling an overwhelming sense of dread that made them turn back before they ventured too far inside. One man told me he saw his missing brother standing among the trees, calling his name. Another woman swore she heard children laughing, not the happy kind, but something twisted, almost malicious. When I asked where these sightings took place, every single person pointed toward the same spot, the heart of Black Hollow Woods. And yet, despite all the warnings, I knew I had to go there. Not because I wanted to solve some grand mystery or become famous for uncovering the truth. No, I needed answers for myself, for Clara, for everyone whose lives had been torn apart by those woods. If it meant risking my own life, so be it. But little did I know, stepping into Black Hollow Woods would change everything. Preparation became my obsession. For months, I studied maps, read accounts online, and scoured forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. I stocked up on supplies: a flashlight, extra batteries, matches, water purification tablets, and a portable GPS device. My phone wouldn't work once I entered the woods. I'd already learned that much, but I figured the GPS might help keep me oriented. Still, deep down, I felt uneasy. It wasn't just the stories anymore. It was the way people reacted when I mentioned the woods. Their faces would pale, their voices drop to barely audible whispers. "You shouldn't go there," they'd say. "Something's wrong with those woods." On the morning I set out, the air was heavy with anticipation or maybe dread. I parked my car at the edge of the forest, where the asphalt road abruptly ended and the dirt trail began. A rusted sign stood crookedly beside the path, its paint chipped and faded. In bold letters, it read, "Warning, Black Hollow Woods, unsafe for travel." Below that, someone had spray painted a single word in red: "Turn back." I hesitated for a moment, staring at the sign. Was this really such a good idea? Could I trust myself to make it out alive? Then I remembered Clara's face, her smile, the last time I saw her. That memory steeled my resolve. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the trail. At first, everything seemed normal. The sun filtered weakly through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows across the ground. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional breeze stirred the leaves. But as I pressed deeper into the woods, the atmosphere began to shift. The sounds of nature grew quieter until they stopped altogether. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, not even the faintest whisper of wind. Just silence. A strange sensation crept over mean itch between my shoulder blades, like someone was watching me. I spun around, scanning the trees behind me, but there was nothing. Nothing except the endless rows of trunks stretching endlessly into the distance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My GPS started acting up next. At first, it simply lost signal, which I expected. But then the screen glitched, displaying random coordinates that didn't match any known location. Lines appeared where they shouldn't, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, like symbols or sigils. Frustrated, I turned it off and shoved it into my bag. Time began to warp. I couldn't tell whether hours or minutes had passed. The sun seemed stuck in the sky, refusing to move. Shadows lengthened and shortened unpredictably, casting shapes that didn't belong. Once, I thought I caught sight of movementa figure darting between the trees, but whenever I approached, it vanished without a trace. Then came the whispers. They started softly, almost imperceptibly, carried on a non-existent breeze. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I listened closer, I realized the voices weren't random, they were speaking names. Familiar names. Names of people who had gone missing in Black Hollow Woods. Clara, one voice murmured, low and mournful. My heart froze. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one there, just the trees, standing silent and unyielding. The further I went, the stranger the forest became. Trees bent at impossible angles, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. Vines snaked across the ground, writhing like living creatures. Even the air felt different, thicker, heavier, pressing against my chest with each breath. And still, the whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. You shouldn't be here. Turn back while you can. They're waiting. For a brief moment, I considered doing exactly that, but something drove me forward, a compulsion I couldn't explain. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was hope, or maybe it was something darker, a pull exerted by the woods themselves. Eventually, I reached what I believed to be the center of Black Hollow Woods. The trees thinned slightly here, revealing a clearing bathed in an unnatural light. It wasn't sunlight, it was colder, paler, casting long, distorted shadows that danced erratically across the ground. In the middle of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk blackened and cracked, its roots spreading outward like clawed fingers. Carved into its bark were symbols I didn't recognize, glowing faintly with a sickly green hue. As I approached, the whispers grew deafening. Now, they weren't just names, they were memories, fragments of conversations, moments stolen from my mind. I heard Clara's laugh, her voice teasing me about something trivial. I heard my mother crying after learning of Clara's disappearance. I heard myself screaming in terror as the realization hit me. The forest was feeding off my memories. Panic surged within me, but I forced myself to focus. What was this place? Why did it exist? And why did it seem so intent on consuming those who entered? That's when I noticed the figures gathered at the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought they were statues, lifeless, unmoving shapes carved from stone. But as I watched, they shifted, turning their heads ever so slightly to regard me. Faces emerged from the darkness, pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow pits of emptiness. "Welcome home," one of them rasped. Home? What did they mean by that? Before I could ask, the ground beneath me trembled violently. Roots burst forth from the earth, wrapping around my legs, pulling me toward the massive tree. I struggled, kicking and clawing at the soil, but the roots held fast. Panic gave way to desperation as the whispers turned into screams, echoing in my ears until I thought I'd go mad. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The roots released me, retreating back into the ground. The figures in the clearing dissolved into mist, leaving me alone once more. The tree loomed above me, its glowing symbols dimming until they vanished entirely. For a moment, I sat there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. It was then that I noticed the notebook. Propped against the base of the tree was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but still legible. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up, flipping through the entries. Each one belonged to someone who had entered Black Hollow Woods before me, people who had written down their experiences, their fears, their final thoughts before disappearing forever. The last entry was unfinished. I don't know what this place is, but it knows me. It knows everything about me. It shows me things I wish I could forget, makes me relive moments I'd rather bury. Is this what happens to everyone who comes here? Do we all end up trapped in our own minds? Beneath the words was a single sentence scrawled in frantic handwriting. If you're reading this, run. Get out while you still can. I dropped the notebook and stumbled backward, my pulse racing. Run? How could I run when I didn't even know where I was anymore? The paths had twisted and turned, leading me in circles until I lost all sense of direction. And now, standing in this eerie clearing, I wondered if escape was even possible. As the days, perhaps hours dragged on, I began to piece together the truth about Black Hollow Woods. It wasn't a physical place, not entirely. Yes, the trees and the ground existed, but the forest itself was something else, a gateway, a prison, a manifestation of whatever dwelled beyond the veil of reality. The whispers, the memories, the figures in the clearing, all of it, was part of the forest's design. It fed on emotions, on fears and regrets, using them to ensnare its victims. Those who entered rarely left, not because they were killed, but because they became part of the woods themselves. Trapped in an endless loop of torment, reliving their worst moments over and over again. But there was more, much more. In the quiet moments, when the whispers subsided and the forest seemed almost peaceful, I began to hear another sound of voice, distinct and clear, speaking directly to me. It wasn't human, not exactly, but it understood my language well enough. It called me by name, promised me answers if I stayed, if I surrendered. "What do you want?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure if it could hear me. "To show you the truth," it replied, its voice resonating in my mind. "To let you see what lies beyond." Beyond what? Beyond the woods? Beyond life itself? The voice didn't answer. Instead, it showed me images, flashes of light and shadow, glimpses of places I couldn't begin to comprehend. Worlds unlike anything I'd ever imagined, populated by beings both beautiful and horrifying. And in the center of it all, a figure watching me, smiling faintly as though it knew something I didn't. Was this real? Or was it merely a trick, a ploy to keep me trapped? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I had to get out, somehow. Days later, maybe minutes, I emerged from the woods, gasping for air as sunlight blinded me. My clothes were torn, my skin scratched and bruised, but I was alive. More importantly, I was free. Or so I thought. Back in my car, I checked my phone for the first time since entering the woods. To my relief, it worked again, showing full bars and a strong signal. I opened the map app, expecting to see the location of the nearest town. Instead, the screen displayed a message. "You're still here." My blood ran cold. I stared at the phone, then glanced around me. The forest loomed in the rearview mirror, its edges blurring and shifting as though mocking me. Had I truly escaped? Or had the woods followed me out? I haven't slept since. Every night I hear the whispers again, softer now, but persistent. Sometimes I think I see faces in the shadows outside my window, watching me, waiting. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I swear I feel roots curling around my ankles, pulling me back into the darkness. Maybe I'll never leave Black Hollow Woods after all. Bloody Mary answered in my mirror. It was a humid summer night in the small town of Briarwood, where the air felt thick and heavy, pressing down on everything like an invisible weight. The clock struck midnight, and the house on Elm Street stood silent, except for the faint hum of crickets chirping outside. Inside, Megan Carter, a curious 17-year-old with an insatiable appetite for urban legends, sat alone in her dimly lit bathroom. Her friends had dared her earlier that evening to summon Bloody Maria, a ghostly figure said to appear in mirrors when called upon under specific conditions. Though skeptical, Megan's curiosity got the better of her, leading her to attempt the ritual herself. The bathroom was small but functional, its walls painted a pale blue that now seemed almost gray in the low light. A single bulb flickered above the sink, casting eerie shadows across the room. Megan stood before the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with wide eyes full of both excitement and apprehension. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Okay," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. "Here goes nothing." She closed her eyes tightly and began the chant, her voice steady at first but growing shakier with each repetition. "Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary." With every word, the temperature in the room seemed to drop noticeably. By the time she reached the third repetition, goosebumps erupted along her arms, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Still, she pressed on, determined to see this through. "Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary." On the final repetition, Megan hesitated, her courage wavering. But then, as if responding directly to her call, something strange happened. The light above the sink flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness before snapping back on again. Megan gasped, her eyes flying open. What she saw in the mirror made her blood run cold. Instead of her own reflection staring back at her, there was another figure, a woman with long, tangled hair that hung loosely around her face, her skin deathly pale and streaked with what looked unmistakably like blood. Her eyes burned with a malevolent intensity, boring straight into Megan's soul. Megan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her feet as sheer terror gripped her body. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. The figure in the mirror didn't respond immediately. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, mimicking Megan's movements as if mocking her fear. Then, without warning, the mirror cracked a jagged line spreading outward from the center, splitting the image into fractured pieces. Megan screamed, covering her ears as a deafening screech filled the air, echoing off the walls and reverberating through her skull. Outside, the storm that had been brewing all evening finally broke loose. Thunder roared in the distance, lightning illuminating the sky with brilliant flashes of white-hot energy. Rain began pelting against the windows, adding to the cacophony of sounds that now surrounded Megan. Trapped in the bathroom, she could feel the atmosphere shifting, becoming heavier, more oppressive. It was as though the very fabric of reality was bending to accommodate some otherworldly presence. Desperate to escape, Megan turned and bolted toward the door, wrenching it open and fleeing down the hallway. Her bare feet slapped against the cool wooden floor as she ran, her breathing ragged and uneven. Behind her, she swore she heard footsteps soft but deliberate, following her every move. Each step echoed eerily through the otherwise silent house, sending chills down her spine. When she reached her bedroom, she slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning heavily against it as relief washed over her momentarily. But the reprieve was short-lived. As Megan caught her breath, she noticed something odd about her room. Shadows danced across the walls, moving independently of any light source. The curtains billowed despite no wind entering through the closed windows. And then came the whispers, faint at first, but gradually growing louder until they filled the entire space. They were unintelligible, yet undeniably sinister, wrapping themselves around Megan's mind like tendrils of smoke. Unable to bear it any longer, Megan grabbed her phone and dialed her best friend, Clara. "Clara, you won't believe what just happened," she cried out, her voice cracking with emotion. She recounted the events in hurried bursts, pausing only to take shallow breaths between sentences. On the other end of the line, Clara listened intently, her usual skepticism replaced by genuine concern. "Megan, you need to get out of there," she urged urgently. "Go somewhere safe now." But leaving wasn't so simple. As Megan tried to compose herself enough to leave the house, strange occurrences continued to plague her. Objects moved on their own accord, drawers opening and slamming shut seemingly without cause. The lights flickered erratically, plunging parts of the house into darkness while others remained inexplicably illuminated. Most disturbing of all was the feeling of being watched not just by the entity in the mirror, but by something else entirely. Something older, darker, more primal. By dawn, Megan realized she couldn't stay in the house another minute. Summoning whatever courage she had left, she gathered her things and slipped outside, the fresh morning air providing a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. She drove to Clara's house, where she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably as she recounted every detail of the horrifying ordeal. Together, they researched Bloody Mary legends, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at the origins of the vengeful spirit said to haunt countless mirrors across the country. Over the following weeks, Megan noticed subtle changes in her life. Strange reflections appeared in mirrors even when she knew no one else was present. Whispers followed her wherever she went, haunting her dreams and seeping into her waking moments. No matter how hard she tried to convince herself it was all in her head, deep down she knew the truth. Bloody Mary had answered her call, and now she wouldn't let go easily. Months later, Megan still carries the scars of that fateful night. Though she has since moved away from Briarwood, seeking solace in unfamiliar surroundings, the memories linger like ghosts refusing to be exorcised. Every now and then, late at night when the world seems most still, she glances nervously into the mirror, half expecting to see those same hollow eyes staring back at her once more. Next story. The Clapping Man of Missouri. He only comes when you clap back. It all started with a whisper in the wind, or so it seemed. I was sitting on the porch of my uncle's cabin late one evening, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring out into the darkness that stretched endlessly beyond the edge of town. It was August, and the air carried an oppressive heat that clung to your skin like a second layer of clothing. The crickets chirped rhythmically, their song blending seamlessly with the hum of cicadas. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. Let me back up for a moment. My name is Alex, and I grew up in a small rural town called Willow Creek, nestled deep within the rolling hills of Missouri. If you've never been here, picture this: endless fields of golden corn swaying gently under the sun, narrow dirt roads winding through dense forests where sunlight barely penetrates, and a quiet stillness that lingers even when the world outside seems chaotic. But beneath that serene surface lies something darker, something whispered about by locals over hushed tones during late-night gatherings at the diner or around campfires deep in the woods. You see, Willow Creek has its own urban legenda story passed down through generations, told to children as cautionary tales and dismissed by adults as mere superstition. They call him the Clapping Man. As kids, we heard snippets of the tale from older siblings or friends whose parents had warned them not to stray too far into the woods after dark. According to legend, the Clapping Man roams the outskirts of Willow Creek, appearing only in places untouched by civilization, abandoned barns, desolate fields, and shadowy groves where trees twist unnaturally toward the sky. He's said to be drawn to sound specifically, clapping. Here's how the story goes. If you clap twice or more in these isolated areas, he will come, and once he arrives, there's no turning back. Locals always added a chilling caveat. He only comes if you clap back. At first glance, it sounds absurd, doesn't it? Like some half-baked ghost story meant to scare restless teenagers into behaving themselves. But no one ever dared to test it not anymore. Not since. Well, let's just say there are reasons why people steer clear of certain parts of the forest now. Fast forward 10 years later, and I found myself returning to Willow Creek for what was supposed to be a peaceful summer break before starting graduate school. My childhood best friend, Jamie, had invited me to join her and a group of friends for a weekend camping trip near Old Hollow Lake, a secluded area surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. It wasn't exactly my idea of fun. I'd rather stay indoors reading books, but Jamie insisted, claiming it would help me reconnect with nature. We arrived late Friday afternoon, setting up our tents along the lake's rocky shoreline. As dusk settled over the landscape, casting long shadows across the water, Jamie pulled out a bottle of whiskey she'd smuggled in her backpack. "To celebrate," she said with a mischievous grin. We sat around the fire, laughing and sharing stories late into the night. That's when someone brought up the Clapping Man. "It's stupid," Jamie scoffed, taking a swig from the bottle. "Just another dumb legend to keep us scared of the woods. Who even believes that crap?" Her words hung heavy in the air, though none of us argued. There was an unspoken agreement among us. While most viewed the story as folklore, there remained a kernel of unease buried deep within each of us. Maybe it was the way the wind picked up suddenly, rustling the leaves overhead, or the distant howl of a coyote echoing through the valley. Whatever it was, it made the silence afterward feel heavier than usual. Then came the dare. "Fine," Jamie said, slamming the bottle onto a log. "If you guys don't believe me, let's prove it. Let's go find this Clapping Man and see if he actually exists." No one responded immediately. Instead, we exchanged nervous glances, the flickering flames reflecting off our faces. Finally, another friend, Sam, spoke up. "All right, but only if you do it first." Jamie smirked, standing up abruptly. "Deal." Armed with flashlights and a growing sense of dread, we ventured deeper into the woods surrounding the lake. The path narrowed quickly, forcing us to walk single file as the canopy above thickened, blocking out the moonlight. Every snap of a twig or scuttle of unseen creatures sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to convince myself it was just the alcohol talking. When we reached a clearing, Jamie stopped abruptly. She turned to face us, her eyes gleaming with determination or maybe bravado. "Watch closely," she said, raising her hands. Then, without hesitation, she clapped twice. The sound echoed through the clearing, reverberating off the trees before fading into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of insects. Then, a faint clap, distant yet unmistakable, answered hers. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Beside me, Sam muttered, "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could respond, another clap followed, closer this time, and then another, each one louder than the last, closing in like footsteps in the dark. Panic set in as Jamie stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. The beam rolled away, illuminating the edge of the clearing and revealing a shadow moving between the trees. It wasn't human. By the time we scrambled back to camp, adrenaline coursing through our veins, the mood had shifted dramatically. No one joked anymore. Instead, we huddled together, speaking in hushed tones while keeping watch over the woods. Hours passed, and though the claps hadn't returned, none of us dared to sleep. That night, I couldn't shake the image of that shadow etched into my mind. It moved unnaturally, almost fluidly, slipping between trunks with ease. And those claps, they weren't random. They were deliberate, calculated, like someone or something was playing a game with us. Over the next few days, strange occurrences plagued our group. Faint clapping echoed in the distance whenever we ventured near the woods. Footsteps trailed behind us on empty paths. Once, I swore I saw movement out of the corner of my Aya figure crouched low among the cornfields, watching silently. When I turned to look directly, it vanished. But the worst part? None of us had initiated the ritual again. Yet the claps persisted. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I decided to take a walk along the lakeshore. The air was cooler now, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. I walked aimlessly, trying to process everything that had happened. Was it real? Or were we simply projecting our fears onto the wilderness? As I stood gazing out at the water, the world around me seemed to pause. The wind died down completely, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Even the crickets fell silent. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of clapping. At first, it was soft, almost imperceptible. Then it grew louder, closer. Each clap resonated through the air, sending chills racing up my spine. I spun around, heart pounding, searching for the source. Nothing. Until the final clap came. It wasn't from behind me. It wasn't from the woods. It was right beside me, so close I could feel the vibrations in my chest. I screamed, bolting toward the campsite, ignoring the branches clawing at my arms and legs. By the time I reached the others, tears streamed down my face, and I couldn't form coherent sentences. Later, when I calmed enough to describe what I'd experienced, Jamie asked hesitantly, "Did you see anything?" I nodded slowly. A shape, tall and thin, too thin. And his smile, it didn't move. It stayed frozen, like he knew something we didn't. After that night, things escalated rapidly. Claps echoed throughout the campsite at random intervals, waking us from fitful dreams. Shadows loomed constantly at the edges of our vision, retreating whenever we tried to investigate. One morning, we discovered footprints leading away from the lake, impossibly large and unnatural. And then there was the mirror. On our last day in Willow Creek, I caught sight of someone clapping in the distance, standing atop a hill overlooking the lake. My breath hitched as I squinted through binoculars, hoping to identify who it was. But when I finally focused, I dropped them instantly. Because the person clapping wasn't someone else. It was me. Or at least, it looked like me. Same clothes, same posture, same terrified expression. Except this version of myself wasn't alone. Behind me, or rather, behind the doppelganger stood the clapping man. Tall, impossibly thin, with a smile that stretched wider than any human mouth should. Before I could scream, the figure raised its hand and clapped twice. This time, I didn't answer. Because I knew better. Now, months later, I still hear claps sometimes. Not every day, but often enough to remind me that whatever we unleashed that night isn't done with us yet. And each time, I wonder, did I summon it? Or was it waiting all along? Whoever, whatever it is, it knows me, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants. So please heed my warning. Don't clap back, because once you do, there's no going back. Black-eyed kids knocked on my door. Late one evening, around 10:45 p.m., in the quiet town of Eldridge, Ohio, a chilling event unfolded at the home of a woman named Emily Carter. The night was unusually still, with no wind to stir the leaves or rustle through the trees. A thick silence enveloped the area, broken only by the distant hum of an occasional car passing on the highway miles away. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over everything it touched. Inside her modest two-story house, Emily sat alone on the couch, engrossed in a book while sipping lukewarm tea. Her dog, Max, a loyal golden retriever, lay sprawled at her feet, his breathing steady and rhythmic. Emily had just turned the page when she heard Ida's soft but distinct knock at the front door. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor stopping by unannounced, though that seemed odd given the late hour. She glanced at the clock again, confirming the time. Who could possibly be visiting now? Setting her book down carefully, she rose from the couch, her heart beginning to beat faster as unease crept into her mind. Max lifted his head, ears perked, sensing something amiss. He let out a low growl, his tail twitching nervously against the carpet. As Emily approached the door, she hesitated, peering cautiously through the peephole. What she saw made her blood run cold. There stood two children, no older than 10 or 11 years old, dressed in dark clothing that seemed far too formal for their age. Their faces were pale, almost ghostly white under the dim porch light. But what truly unnerved Emily were their eyes pitch black, void of any visible iris or pupil, like staring into the depths of endless night. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively stepped back from the door. "Who's there?" she called out shakily, her voice trembling despite her attempts to sound calm. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the doorframe as if seeking some kind of stability. Outside, the children remained eerily silent, their heads tilted slightly to one side, as though studying her reaction. It was unsettling, unnatural even. Max began barking loudly now, his protective instincts fully awakened. His frantic noises filled the otherwise silent house, creating a stark contrast to the oppressive stillness outside. "Please," one of the children finally spoke, their voice surprisingly deep and resonant for such young-looking beings. "We need help. Our car broke down nearby and we don't have anywhere else to go tonight." Their tone carried an odd cadence, monotone yet strangely persuasive. Emily felt a strange pull toward opening the door, as if some invisible force urged her to comply. But another part of her screamed louder, warning her not to trust these visitors. "No, I can't," Emily stammered, her resolve strengthening as fear gave way to caution. "I'm sorry, but I cannot open the door. You should call someone who can assist you better." She tried to keep her voice firm, though panic bubbled beneath the surface. The children didn't respond immediately. Instead, they simply stared at her through the glass, their expression unreadable, their black eyes piercing through her soul. Max continued barking furiously, his paws scrabbling against the floor as he paced near the door. Emily backed further away, clutching her chest where her heart pounded wildly. "Go away," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. "Leave me alone." For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the knocking resumed, this time harder, more insistent. Each blow reverberated through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. Emily stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Max, who was now cowering behind her. Tears streamed down her face as sheer terror gripped her body. She grabbed her phone, fumbling with trembling hands to dial 911. "Hello? Yes, this is Emily Carter speaking. I live at 42 Maple Street in Eldridge. Please send someone quickly. I think something dangerous is outside my house." Her voice cracked again as she struggled to explain the situation. The dispatcher assured her help was on the way, but instructed her to stay calm and avoid opening the door under any circumstances. Minutes passed like hours as Emily waited anxiously, every nerve in her body on high alert. The knocking persisted, growing louder and more relentless with each passing second. At one point, it stopped altogether, leaving an unsettling silence that was somehow worse than the noise itself. Emily wondered if they had gone or if they were merely waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Finally, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer until their sound echoed directly outside her house. Relief washed over Emily as she watched red and blue lights flash across her windows. Officers arrived swiftly, their boots thudding heavily on her porch. When they opened the door, Emily collapsed into their arms, sobbing uncontrollably. They promised to investigate thoroughly, but when they stepped outside, there was no sign of the mysterious children. No footprints, no evidence of a vehicle breakdown, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. In the days that followed, Emily couldn't shake the memory of those haunting black eyes. She read stories online about similar encounters, people claiming to have met so-called black-eyed kids who appeared during the night asking for entry into homes or vehicles. Some dismissed them as urban legends, while others swore they were supernatural entities preying on human vulnerability. Whatever they were, Emily knew one thing for certain: she would never answer the door after dark again. The experience left an indelible mark on her psyche, a constant reminder of the unseen dangers lurking beyond the safety of her own four walls. Even months later, whenever she heard a knock at the door, her pulse quickened and her mind replayed that terrifying night in vivid detail. And though she told herself repeatedly that it was over, deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if the black-eyed children were still out there, watching, waiting, searching for their next victim. Next story. The house that changes layout every night. Rooms move when you're asleep. I never thought I'd end up here, this place. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new chapter in my life after everything fell apart. But now I'm not so sure what's real anymore. It all started when the letter arrived. A plain envelope with no return address, just my name scrawled across it in faded ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper, brittle and yellowed with age. The words were simple but strange. You've inherited a house. No explanation, no details about who sent it or why. Just an address, a small town I'd never heard of, nestled deep within the woods. At first, I didn't believe it. Inheritance? From whom? I had no family left, no one I could think of who would leave me anything. Still, something about the letter felt off. Like it wasn't meant for me to question. So, against better judgment, I packed my things and drove toward the unknown. The drive took hours longer than expected. The GPS kept glitching, rerouting me through winding back roads that seemed to twist and turn endlessly. By the time I reached the town, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over rows of dilapidated houses, And then I saw it, the house. It stood alone at the edge of the forest, towering and imposing, its walls covered in ivy that looked almost alive, swaying gently even though there was no wind. The windows were dark, their glass cracked and clouded with dust. Yet, despite its decrepit appearance, something about it called to me, pulling me closer like a magnet. As I stepped out of the car, the air grew colder, heavier. My breath fogged in front of me as I approached the front door. It creaked open as if expecting me, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with peeling wallpaper. There was no sign of life incidino furniture, no personal belongings, just silence. And yet, I stayed. For the first few days, nothing seemed unusual. Sure, the house was old and needed repairs, but other than that, it felt normal enough. I set up camp in what appeared to be the largest room on the ground floor, using a sleeping bag and some spare blankets. During the day, I explored the rest of the house, cataloging each room in my mind. There was a kitchen with rusted appliances, a dining area with a broken table, and several bedrooms upstairs, each more bare than the last. But then, the changes began. One morning, I woke up to find a door where none had been before. It stood halfway down the hall, slightly ajar, leading into darkness. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Reluctantly, I opened the door, only to discover another hallway behind Itone that led straight to the staircase I'd already seen earlier. Shaking my head, I closed the door and went about my day, chalking it up to exhaustion from moving in. But later that evening, I noticed something else. One of the windows in the living room was gone, replaced by a solid wall. The spot where it once was still bore the faint outline of its frame, as though someone had bricked it over recently. This time, I couldn't ignore it. Over the next few days, the changes became harder to deny and increasingly unsettling. Doors appeared and disappeared overnight. Hallways stretched longer than they should have, sometimes doubling in length, while others shrank until they barely fit me walking through them. Worst of all, certain rooms vanished entirely. One morning, I woke up to find the bedroom I'd slept in the night before completely gone, replaced by a narrow closet filled with moth-eaten coats. Desperate for answers, I decided to investigate further. I grabbed a pen and notebook, mapping out the layout of the house as best I could. Each room, each corridor, every twist and turn, I documented it all meticulously. Then, each morning, I compared the map to the current state of the house. And every time, the discrepancies grew worse. By this point, paranoia had begun to seep into my thoughts. Was I losing my mind? Had the isolation driven me mad? Or was the house itself playing tricks on me? Determined to get to the bottom of it, I rigged cameras throughout the house, hoping to catch whoever was responsible. But the footage only deepened the mystery. When I reviewed the recordings, I found them riddled with glitches. Frames skipped randomly, audio cut out inexplicably, and entire sections of video repeated in endless loops. Stranger still, some of the clips showed movements I couldn't explain, shadows darting across empty halls, doors swinging shut on their own, whispers echoing from unseen corners. And then came the nightmares. They started subtly, creeping into my dreams like mist rolling over hills. At first, I dreamed of walking through endless corridors, searching for something I couldn't remember. The walls pressed close around me, the air thick and oppressive. Sometimes I'd hear voices calling my name, though I couldn't make out the words. Other times, I felt hands brushing against my skin, cold and clammy, though no one was there. But the worst part? When I woke up, I realized I hadn't actually woken up. I was still dreaming, trapped in the same labyrinthine passages I'd been exploring moments ago. Only now, the dream felt different, more vivid, more real. That's when I started hearing things at night, when the house was quiet and still. Scratching sounds echoed through the walls, soft but persistent, like fingernails dragging across wood. Footsteps padded lightly above me, though I knew no one else lived here. Occasionally, I'd hear doors opening and closing, their hinges groaning in protest. Once, I swore I heard laughter low and guttural, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Panic clawed at my chest whenever these noises occurred, but I forced myself to remain calm. If I let fear take hold, I reasoned, it would consume me entirely. Instead, I armed myself with tools, flashlights, notebooks, markersto, document any evidence I might stumble upon, and one fateful afternoon, I made a discovery that changed everything. While tearing up the floorboards in search of wiring issues or perhaps just distraction, I uncovered a bundle of papers tucked beneath the wooden planks. They were brittle and yellowed, much like the inheritance letter I'd received months ago. Written in shaky handwriting, they detailed the experiences of a previous residenta man named Eliashu claimed the house was alive. According to his notes, the house shifted its layout based on emotions, feeding off fear and confusion. He described waking up in places he shouldn't have been, finding himself lost in corridors that twisted impossibly. He spoke of hearing voices, seeing shadows move in the periphery of his vision. Most chillingly, he warned of falling asleep in specific rooms, claiming they pulled you deeper into the house's mind, trapping you forever. I read the entries late into the night, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Was Elias right? Was the house sentient, manipulating reality around it to ensnare those who dared live within its walls? And if so, why did it choose me? The following nights brought fresh horrors. The house seemed to grow more aggressive, its changes growing bolder and more disorienting. Entire floors rearranged themselves, staircases spiraling upward to nowhere, dead ends appearing where once there had been open space. Furniture rearranged itself without warning, chairs placed upside down, tables tilted precariously. Even the clocks stopped working properly, their hands spinning erratically or freezing altogether. I tried to fight back. I marked the walls with spray paint, drawing arrows and symbols to help navigate the ever-changing maze. But each morning, the markings were gone, erased as though they'd never existed. Then came the final twist. One night, as I lay awake listening to the scratching sounds emanating from the walls, I noticed something peculiar. The patterns of sound weren't random, they formed rhythms, almost musical in nature. Following the noise, I traced it back to a hidden panel in the wall, concealed behind a bookshelf. Behind it, I found a narrow passageway leading downward, far below the foundation of the house. Curiosity overwhelmed caution, and I descended into the darkness. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending farther than I thought possible. Eventually, I emerged into a cavernous chamber illuminated by flickering lanterns. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested an ancient tome bound in black leather. Its pages glowed faintly, pulsating with an inner light. As I reached for the book, a voice whispered in my ear not aloud, but directly inside my mind. "You belong here." Before I could react, the world around me dissolved into chaos. The walls warped and shifted, the ceiling collapsing inward, the floor dropping away beneath me. I screamed, flailing desperately as the darkness swallowed me whole. Now, I don't know where I am or if I'm still alive. All I see are endless corridors stretching infinitely in every direction. The house calls to me, its voice sweet and seductive, promising peace if I simply surrender. But I can't. Not yet, because if I do, I'll never escape. Will you?
Next story. Lost for 7 minutes in another dimension. The wind was calm, the air crisp with autumn's chill. I had been walking along the familiar path near my Homia shortcut through the woods that I took every evening after work. It was nothing out of the ordinary, until it happened. I remember stepping outside at exactly 6:43 p.m. My phone told me so. The screen glowed faintly as I scrolled through emails, trying to clear my mind before heading into the forest. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement. Everything seemed normal, too normal. As I entered the wooded area, the trees closed around me like ancient sentinels guarding secrets too old to comprehend. Their branches stretched high above, forming a canopy that filtered the fading sunlight into soft, golden hues. Birds chirped softly in the distance, their melodies blending seamlessly with the rustle of leaves underfoot. It was peaceful, serene even. But then, something shifted. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Maybe it was just a trick of the light tour. Perhaps the way the shadows danced against the bark of the trees made them seem more alive than they should have been. Still, there was an unsettling feeling creeping up my spine, one I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. And then it hit me. There's this part of the trail where the ground dips slightly, creating a small incline followed by a decline. You know the kind you don't think twice about because you've walked over it hundreds of times without incident. That day, though, it wasn't different. Or maybe it was. I stepped forward, my left foot descending onto the slope, when suddenly everything went black. Not pitch black, mind you, more like gray. A suffocating, heavy shade of gray that enveloped everything around me. One moment I was walking, the next I felt myself falling not physically, but mentally. Like slipping between gears in a car, only instead of shifting smoothly, each transition jarred painfully against my consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't where I belonged. The world before me bore little resemblance to the forest I'd known all my life. Instead of towering pines and oaks, the landscape consisted of jagged, twisted structures jutting upward from the ground like broken bones piercing flesh. These weren't buildings in the traditional sense, they looked organic yet mechanical, pulsing faintly with veins of blue-green energy coursing beneath translucent surfaces. The sky above was wrong too. No clouds marred its surface, but neither did it resemble any earthly atmosphere. It shimmered constantly, like oil spilled across water, reflecting colors that shouldn't exist. Violet, teal, crimson streaks swirling endlessly without pattern or purpose. But what struck me most wasn't the surreal scenery, it was the silence, complete and absolute. No bird song, no wind whispering through non-existent foliage, no sound at all. Just emptiness. And yet, despite the absence of noise, I could feel something watching me. Something or someone just beyond the edge of perception. When I turned to look behind me, expecting to see nothing, I froze. Human-like figures stood scattered throughout the landscape, though none moved. They weren't pioplanot entirely. Their forms were distorted, elongated, with limbs bent at unnatural angles. Some wore tattered clothing, others nothing at all. Their faces were featureless voids, black holes sucking in whatever light dared approach, and still they watched. Time itself felt strange here, stretched thin like elastic, pulling apart seconds until they became minutes, hours, lifetimes. Every step I took seemed to echo infinitely within my mind, reverberating louder and louder until I feared I might go mad. Yet somehow I kept moving forward, driven by some instinctual need to escape this place, even if escape meant facing whatever horrors awaited me elsewhere. How long had I been here? Days? Weeks? Years? Impossible to tell. The passage of time defied logic, bending and folding back upon itself until past and future blurred together into an endless present. Each breath I drew felt heavier than the last, as though the very air resisted my presence. My thoughts grew sluggish, tangled knots impossible to untangle. Questions swirled relentlessly in my mind. Where am I? Why am I here? Will I ever leave? Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, who wouldn't begin hearing voices after being trapped in such a place? But these weren't mere echoes of my own fears. They carried meaning, intent. Words formed slowly, deliberately, crawling into my ears like insects burrowing into flesh. You belong here, they said. This is your true home. No, I whispered aloud, shaking my head violently. I'm not supposed to be here. They will come for you, the voices continued, ignoring my denial. And when they do... The sentence trailed off, leaving me trembling with dread. Who were they? What would happen when they arrived? Before I could dwell further on the implications, another shift occurred done far more abrupt than the first. One moment I stood amidst those alien structures, surrounded by faceless watchers. The next, I found myself sprawled on the forest floor, gasping for air as though I'd just surfaced from drowning. The familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth filled my nostrils, grounding me in reality once more, or so I thought. Panic surged through me as I scrambled upright, frantically checking my surroundings. Yes, it was the same trail I'd started down earlier. The trees loomed overhead, their silhouettes sharp against the twilight sky. Everything appeared unchanged, except for one crucial detail. My phone read 6:50 p.m. Only 7 minutes had passed since I'd begun my walk. 7 minutes, that's all. Except, I knew better. I knew I'd been gone longer. Much longer. How could I explain the impossible? How could I make sense of what I'd seen and heard? Back home, things weren't quite right. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. My apartment remained untouched, clocks ticking steadily on the walls, yet small inconsistencies nagged at me. A photo frame hanging crookedly where it hadn't been before, a chair pulled slightly away from the dining table. Even the reflection staring back at me from the mirror felt off, slightly paler. Slightly thinner. Worse still, people acted strangely around me. Friends avoided eye contact during conversations, muttering excuses about being busy whenever I attempted to engage them. Strangers stared openly, their gazes lingering a beat too long before averting. It was as though I existed in some liminal space between worlds visible, yes, but not truly acknowledged. And then there was the sensation of being followed. Whenever I ventured outside, I caught glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye, shadows darting between parked cars, figures melting into doorways. Once, I even swore I saw one of those faceless beings standing across the street, its form flickering in and out of existence like static on a television screen. By the time I reached it, however, nothing remained save empty pavement. Desperate for answers, I began researching online. Surely, I couldn't be the only person to experience such a phenomenon. To my surprise, I discovered dozens of accounts eerily similar to mine. People vanishing for precisely 7 minutes only to return changed forever. Some claimed memories of alternate dimensions. Others spoke of whispers urging them toward unknown destinations. A few admitted outright that they believed themselves to be imposters creatures masquerading as humans while the real versions rotted away in some other realm. A theory emerged among commenters. Every 7 minutes, the veil separating our world from theirs thinned enough to allow brief crossings. Most returned unaware, their minds erasing the trauma automatically. Those who remembered. Well, we paid dearly for the knowledge. But what if returning wasn't always guaranteed? What if I hadn't really come back? Now, sitting alone in my apartment late at night, I hear it again. The whispers. Faint at first, growing louder with each passing second. They call my name now, insistent and urgent. Come back, they say. You belong here. I glance at the clock beside my bed. 12:00 a.m. midnight. Exactly 7 minutes after the hour began. And then, the room begins to fade.
Next story. Alone in office, rainy night shift horror. Lonely office in the rain. The rain drummed against the glass windows like 1,000 tiny fingers, tapping an unrelenting rhythm. Outside, the night was pitch black, save for the faint glow of distant streetlights reflecting off puddles. Inside the old office building, fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced across empty cubicles. Ethan sat at his desk, hunched over a computer screen displaying rows upon rows of data entries. It was his third week working as a night shift data processor, and he already hated every second of it. The isolation gnawed at him, but the paycheck kept him coming back. Or maybe it was just the hope that things would get better with time. But tonight felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on why. At exactly midnight, the power surged briefly, causing the monitors to blink out before sputtering back to life. Ethan sighed, muttering under his breath about outdated wiring. He glanced up at the clock 12. 3 a.m. tried to focus on the task ahead, but something about the silence pressed down on him, heavier than usual. He reached for his thermos of coffee, only to find it empty. Cursing softly, he stood up from his chair and stretched his sore muscles. As he walked toward the break room, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the cavernous space, each step reverberating like a heartbeat in the darkness. The break room was located near the far end of the floor, past several rows of abandoned cubicles. Most of them were relics from when the company had been thriving years ago, their contents long since cleared out except for a few stray papers and broken staplers. Ethan passed by one such cubicle and paused. There, on the edge of a dusty desk, lay a single piece of paper printout with no apparent source. Curiosity piqued, he picked it up. The page contained a cryptic message typed in bold letters. "Don't stay after midnight." Ethan frowned. Was this some kind of prank? He turned the paper over, searching for any clues or signatures, but there was nothing else written on it. Shrugging it off as someone's idea of humor, he crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash can beside the printer. Returning to the break room, he refilled his thermos with what little coffee remained in the pot. As he stirred in sugar, he noticed another sound of faint creaking noise coming from somewhere deeper inside the building. At first, he dismissed it as the building settling, but then it happened again, louder this time. It sounded deliberate. Shaking off the unease, Ethan decided to ignore it. After all, it was probably just the wind or pipes expanding due to the cold. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he made his way back to his station. When he returned, however, something was wrong. His computer screen displayed a new window he hadn't opened an email draft addressed to all staff. The subject line read, "Reunion Reminder." Beneath it, the body of the email consisted of 3 simple words. "We miss you." Ethan froze. This wasn't normal. Who could have sent this? More importantly, why did those words send chills down his spine? Before he could investigate further, the intercom crackled to life. A low, distorted voice whispered through the speakers, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's heart pounded against his ribcage as the intercom fell silent. The voice slow, guttural, and unmistakably menacing had sent a wave of dread coursing through him. He stared at the speaker above his head, half expecting it to speak again, but the room remained eerily quiet, save for the relentless patter of rain outside. He tried to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was a malfunction. Perhaps leftover recordings from some corporate event were accidentally triggered. Yet deep down, he knew that explanation felt hollow. There was something off about this place tonight. Something unnatural. Deciding not to take any chances, Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed security. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Panic bubbled in his chest, of course. They wouldn't be back until morning. He was utterly alone. His gaze shifted back to the computer screen. The email draft still lingered, its words mocking him. Slowly, hesitantly, he clicked Reply All, hoping to send a message to whoever or whatever was behind this. As soon as he hit send, the screen flickered violently, plunging the office into darkness for a split second. When the lights returned, the email window was gone. In its place was a live video feed from one of the building's surveillance cameras. The footage showed an empty hallway leading to the stairwell. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, almost imperceptibly, a shadow moved along the wall, a shape too distorted to belong to anyone human. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to close the window or keep watching. Before he could decide, the shadow detached itself from the wall and stepped into view. It wasn't a person, not exactly. Whatever it was, it walked hunched over, dragging its feet across the floor. Its form was indistinct, cloaked in blackness, but Ethan could swear he saw two glowing red eyes staring directly into the camera and, by extension, at him. The feed cut off abruptly, leaving Ethan paralyzed with fear. His breath came in shallow gasps as he scrambled to make sense of what he'd seen. Was this real, or was exhaustion playing tricks on him? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the office. Heavy, deliberate steps that reverberated through the empty space. They weren't coming from the hallway or the stairs. They were right outside his door. Ethan froze, clutching the edge of his desk. The doorknob began to rattle, slowly turning clockwise. A cold breeze swept into the room, though there were no windows open. The air grew thick, oppressive, making it harder to breathe. And then the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured by darkness. For a moment, Ethan thought it might be someone else working late, but as the figure stepped closer, he realized it couldn't possibly be alive. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and its presence radiated pure malice. Who are you?" Ethan stammered, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing directly at him. From its fingertips, tendrils of smoke-like mist unfurled, curling toward Ethan like serpents. He recoiled, knocking over his chair in an attempt to escape, but the mist followed, wrapping around his ankles and pulling him backward. "No, get off me!" he screamed, thrashing wildly. But the more he struggled, the tighter the grip became. The figure loomed closer, its glowing red eyes locking onto his own. Ethan could feel its gaze piercing through him, stealing away fragments of his sanity. Just before everything went dark, he heard a whisper so faint it barely registered. "You shouldn't have stayed after midnight." Ethan woke up with a start, his body drenched in cold sweat. He was lying on the floor, his chair overturned beside him. The office lights flickered above, casting an unsettling glow over the room. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a nightmare, cruel trick of his exhausted mind. But then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The cryptic note he'd crumpled and thrown away earlier was now pinned to his computer monitor, unfolded, pristine, as though untouched by time. And beneath the original message, "Don't stay after midnight," was a new line scribbled in red ink. "It's too late for you." Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't a dream. Whatever had happened last night or perhaps this morning was very real. His hands shook as he reached for the note, but before he could touch it, the sound of laughter echoed through the office. It wasn't joyful laughter. It was hollow, mocking, and filled with malice. The noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, bouncing off walls and twisting into shapes Ethan couldn't comprehend. He pressed himself against the corner of his desk, trying to shrink away from the unseen source. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Show yourself." The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence so heavy it felt like breathing underwater. Then, faintly, he heard footsteps again, this time closer, more deliberate. They weren't coming from outside the door. They were moving inside the office. Ethan turned slowly, his eyes scanning the rows of cubicles behind him. Most of them were empty, their contents long since removed. But one stood out a cubicle near the window where papers were scattered across the desk, as though someone had left in a hurry. A framed photo sat upright among the chaos, showing a group of people smiling brightly. Curiosity and perhaps a desperate need for answers drew Ethan toward the cubicle. As he approached, the photo caught his eye. The faces in the picture looked familiar, though he couldn't place why. Each person wore a badge labeled with their name: Sarah, Mike, Lisa, Jake, names etched into Ethan's memory without explanation. And then he saw the date printed at the bottom of the photo, 1987. A shiver ran down his spine. Something about that year sent warning bells ringing in his mind. Before he could process it further, the intercom crackled to life once more. This time, instead of whispers or distorted voices, Ethan heard distinct words spoken clearly. "They're waiting for you." "Who? Who's waiting?" Ethan demanded, his voice cracking. There was no answer, only static, followed by a deep, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. The air grew colder, frost forming on the edges of the windows despite the lack of ventilation. Then, one by one, the lights went out. Total darkness enveloped the office, broken only by the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. Ethan fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to guide his steps. He needed to get out now. But as he backed toward the door, he realized it wouldn't budge. Someone or something had locked him in. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. If there was a way out, he had to find it. That's when he noticed movement in the shadows. Shapes emerged from the darkness, humanoid yet warped, their forms shifting and contorting unnaturally. Their glowing red eyes locked onto his, unblinking and merciless. "You shouldn't have stayed," one of them whispered, its voice layered with echoes. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over debris until he found himself back at his desk. Desperation clawed at him as he searched for anything that might help him fight or survive. His fingers brushed against something metallic. a letter opener left behind by a previous occupant. Armed with the makeshift weapon, Ethan faced the advancing figures. They moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring his terror. One of them stepped forward, its form solidifying into the shape of a woman. Her face was pale, her hair matted with blood, and her mouth stretched impossibly wide in a grotesque grin. "Join us," she hissed, extending a hand. "No!" Ethan shouted, lunging forward with the letter opener. The blade struck true, embedding itself in her shoulder. She screamed a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that reverberated through the office, but instead of retreating, she dissolved into smoke, leaving behind nothing but ash. Encouraged by his success, Ethan attacked the others, swinging wildly with the letter opener. Each strike sent them scattering into mist, but more kept appearing, their numbers growing with each passing second. It was like fighting ghosts, because that's exactly what they were. As dawn broke and sunlight streamed through the windows, Ethan collapsed to his knees, utterly spent. The figures vanished with the first rays of light, leaving him alone in the now quiet office. But even as relief washed over him, he knew he hadn't truly escaped. Somewhere in the depths of the building, the reunion awaited. And next time, he might not be so lucky. Ethan staggered out of the office building as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. His body ached, his mind reeling from the events of the night. He had survived, but at what cost? The figures may have vanished with the sunrise, but their promises lingered in his thoughts like venomous whispers. As he reached his car, Ethan noticed something wedged beneath the windshield wiper, a manila folder marked with the words, "Confidential, do not open." His heart sank. Against every instinct screaming at him to leave it alone, he opened the folder. Inside were documents detailing the tragic history of the company. Years ago, in 1987, several employees had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Their bodies were never found, and the case was eventually closed due to lack of evidence. But buried within the files were testimonies from surviving co-worker tales of strange occurrences, shadowy figures, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. One document stood out, a handwritten note by Sarah, one of the missing employees. In it, she described how they had all stayed late one rainy night working on a project that seemed to stretch endlessly. They joked about staying past midnight, unaware of the curse that awaited them. By morning, none of them returned home. Ethan clutched the folder tightly, his hands trembling. He realized now why the photo had felt so familiar. It was a warning. A reminder that those who stayed after midnight didn't just disappear, they became part of the cycle. Before climbing into his car, Ethan glanced back at the office building. Through the rain-streaked windows, he thought he saw movement and outline of figures gathered around his old desk, staring out at him. One of them raised a hand, beckoning him closer. With a scream, Ethan slammed the door shut and sped away, leaving the building and its secrets far behind. But deep down, he knew he couldn't escape forever. The reunion wasn't over. It had only begun. Months later, another night shift worker took Ethan's place. On their very first night, they received a cryptic email draft addressed to all staff. The subject line read, "Reunion Reminder." Beneath it, 3 simple words echoed through the empty office. "We miss you." And so, the cycle continued.
Next story. Trapped in the looping highway. The drive begins. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. Nothing more than a late-night drive through rural highways to clear our heads. Me, Jake, and Sarah, three friends who had been inseparable since high school. We'd done countless road trips before, but this one felt different from the start, though I couldn't put my finger on why. We left at around midnight when the world seemed quieter, like it held its breath, waiting for something or someone to wake it up. The air was crisp, carrying with it that faint metallic scent you only get after a summer storm. It wasn't raining now, but the clouds were thick enough to block out most of the stars. Just a sliver of moonlight spilled onto the asphalt ahead of us, lighting up the winding path of Route 47. Jake was behind the wheel, humming along to some old rock station he loved so much. Sarah sat in the back seat, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, probably checking social media for the 100th time that day. And me? I was riding shotgun, staring out the window at the endless rows of trees lining either side of the highway. They loomed over us, their shadows stretching long across the road as if trying to reach into our car. "Man," Jake said after a while, breaking the silence, "this place feels kind of creepy." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, finally looking up from her phone. "I don't know," Jake shrugged, glancing briefly at me. "Just the way these woods look, like they're watching us or something." I laughed nervously, brushing off his comment. "You've been watching too many horror movies again, Jakes." He grinned, clearly pleased with himself for planting the seed of unease in all of us, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. At first, everything seemed normal. The hours ticked by slowly, marked by the occasional gas station pit stop and bursts of laughter whenever Jake told one of his ridiculous jokes. But then, things started to feel off. It began with the landmarks. We passed a rusted-out barn with peeling red paint, its roof half collapsed under years of neglect. There was also an abandoned gas station tucked between two massive oak trees, its neon sign flickering weakly even though no one had worked there in decades. Both places looked familiar not because we'd seen them earlier in the night, but because they reminded me of photos I'd once scrolled past online. Rural decay captured in grainy black and white images. But then we drove past them again. My stomach dropped. "Guys," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Didn't we just see that barn?" Sarah frowned, leaning forward to peer out the windshield. "What are you talking about?" "I swear, we passed it 10 minutes ago." My eyes darted back and forth, searching for any other explanation. Maybe I'd misremembered, or maybe fatigue was playing tricks on me. After all, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Jake glanced at me, concern etched into his features. "Are you sure, man? Maybe it's just another barn that looks similar." And yet, as we continued driving, the pattern repeated itself. The same twisted tree jutting out of the ground like a gnarled hand reaching for the sky. The same billboard advertising a diner we never stopped at. Even the exact spot where a deer had frozen in headlights before bolting into the woodsit happened twice, almost perfectly synchronized. Something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. The next sign came from technology. First, the GPS. Jake had plugged in coordinates for a small town we planned to visit later in the morning. At least, that's what he thought he did. Because every time he tried recalculating the route, the screen would freeze, displaying the words "Destination Unreachable" in bold red letters. No matter how many times he restarted the app or toggled settings, nothing changed. Then there was the radio. It started looping the same sanga, haunting melodies sung by a voice that sounded both ancient and eerily familiar, over and over again. Each repetition felt louder, closer, as if the music were coming from somewhere inside the car rather than the speakers themselves. When Jake finally turned it off, the eerie silence that followed was almost worse. Time refused to progress. Our watches stopped working simultaneously. Phones lost signal entirely, showing blank screens instead of the usual no service message. Even the dashboard clock remained stuck at 2:37 a.m., blinking endlessly like a broken digital alarm clock. That's when panic set in. Tensions flared quickly. What had started as playful banter devolved into shouting matches fueled by exhaustion and fear. "It's not my fault," Jake snapped, slamming his fists against the steering wheel. "I didn't program this thing. How am I supposed to fix it?" "You should have brought paper maps," Sarah shot back, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't cried during any of our previous adventures, but tonight she looked utterly defeated. "Why didn't you listen to me? Why didn't anyone listen?" I wanted to intervene, to calm them both down, but words failed me. Instead, I stared out the window, hoping against hope that the landscape would change. That we'd stumble upon an exit leading to safety, but no such luck. Hours or perhaps mere moments passed in silence. The only sounds were the tires crunching against gravel and the faint whistling of wind slipping through cracks in the windows. Every mile marker read the same number, mile 187, over and over again. Fatigue crept in relentlessly. My eyelids grew heavy, but sleep refused to claim me. Every time I closed my eyes, visions of the looping highway played behind them, endless and suffocating. And then, we saw it. A figure standing on the shoulder of the road, silhouetted against the dim glow of our headlights. A manner, at least, something resembling a man dressed in tattered clothing that fluttered unnaturally in the breeze. His face was obscured by shadow, but his posture radiated malice. "Stop the car!" Sarah screamed, gripping the seat in front of her so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jake slammed on the brakes, sending us skidding to a halt mere feet away from the stranger. For a moment, none of us dared move. Then, slowly, Jake rolled down the window. "Can we help you?" he called out, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound brave. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering whether to respond. Then it spoke in a voice that echoed like thunder, reverberating through the car and rattling our bones. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, each word dripping with menace. "Turn back while you still can." Before anyone could reply, the figure vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the faint smell of burnt rubber. Realization dawned on us all at once. We weren't merely lost, we were trapped in a loop, a time-space anomaly that defied logic and reason. No matter which direction we turned, no matter how fast we drove, we always ended up right where we started. Exits appeared and disappeared inexplicably. One moment, a clear signpost reading Exit 56 would guide us towards salvation. The next, it would dissolve into thin air, replaced by empty fields stretching endlessly in every direction. Desperation clawed at us. We argued, cried, begged for deliverance, but the highway gave nothing in return. Only emptiness, only repetition. As days, or perhaps centuries blurred together, strange thoughts began creeping into my mind. What if this wasn't real? What if we were already dead, reliving the final moments of our lives over and over again? Or worse, what if we were being punished for sins we couldn't remember committing? One evening, was it morning? We spotted a car ahead of us. Identical to ours in make and model, it moved parallel to ours, keeping pace effortlessly. Inside sat figures identical to ourselves, Jake, Sarah, and me, except their expressions were vacant, hollow, devoid of life. "They're us," Sarah whispered, clutching her knees to her chest. "They're what we'll become if we don't escape." But escape proved impossible. No matter how hard we tried, the car refused to leave the highway. Its wheels spun endlessly, propelling us forward yet never allowing us to advance. And then we escaped. Or so we thought. When we finally pulled off the highway, the world outside felt alien. Buildings crumbled, weeds choked sidewalks, and people walked stiffly, their faces pale and gaunt. A newspaper headline caught my eye. "Local teens disappear on mysterious highway. Last seen 3 years ago." 3 years? Impossible. Yet the date matched today's reality, or what passed for reality now. Relief washed over us briefly, but it was short-lived. As we stood outside the car, catching our breath, I noticed something unsettling. The same rusted-out barn we'd seen countless times on the highway loomed in the distance, its silhouette unmistakable. "No," I muttered, my voice trembling. "Not again." For a split second, I considered running, but then I realized it wouldn't matter. The loop had claimed us, and it wasn't finished yet. So here I sit, writing this account, unsure if anyone will ever find it, unsure if I'm even real anymore. Because sometimes, the highway calls you back. And when it does, there's no turning away. Is anyone still listening? Next story. The day everyone vanished from a mall. It started like any other Saturday, or so I thought. You know how it goes, weekends are for errands, catching up on chores, maybe grabbing lunch with friends if you're lucky. For me though, weekends usually meant running errands alone. That's just life when you're an adult, right? Responsibilities pile up faster than you can say coupon. So there I was, standing in front of my car, keys jingling in hand, mentally ticking off my to-do list. First stop, the grocery store. Second stop, the mall. Why the mall? Well, because sometimes even adults need new socks, and maybe some snacks from the food court while I'm at it. It wasn't anything special, just another trip to pick up a few things before heading home to collapse onto the couch. I pulled into the parking lot around noon. The sun was shining, casting long shadows across the pavement. Cars were lined up neatly in their designated spots, shoppers bustling between them with bags swinging from their arms. Everything seemed perfectly normal, too normal, almost. As I stepped out of my car and locked the doors behind me, I couldn't help but notice something odd, a faint hum in the air. Not loud enough to be distracting, but noticeable enough to make me pause. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the momentary silence. I glanced down at the screen. It was just a spam message offering a free trial subscription to something I didn't care about. I sighed, deleted it, and shoved the phone back into my pocket. Inside the mall, everything felt familiar yet strangely distant. The chatter of voices echoed through the halls, blending together into a comforting background noise. Kids ran past me, laughing as they chased each other through the crowd. Parents called after them, voices strained but not angry. Vendors hawked their wares, shouting deals that no one really needed but everyone pretended to consider. It was all so ordinary until it wasn't. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. I was walking toward the shoe store when I noticed the absence of sound. One moment, the hallways were alive with conversation and footsteps. The next, everything went quiet. Dead quiet. Like someone had pressed mute on the world. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped in my tracks, turning slowly to look around. People were still there, still moving, but now they moved without making a sound. Their lips moved silently, hands gestured meaninglessly, feet shuffled forward without producing even the softest squeak against the tiled floor. It was like watching a silent movie, except this wasn't fiction. This was real life spiraling into something inexplicable. I stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Was this some kind of prank, some elaborate setup orchestrated by the mall management to scare customers, or was I losing my mind? I pinched myself hard, expecting the sharp sting to snap me out of whatever illusion I was trapped in, but nothing changed. The eerie silence remained, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. Panic began to rise in my chest. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to calm down. Maybe I'd misheard something earlier. Maybe the acoustics in the building were playing tricks on me. Yeah, that had to be it. Rational explanations always trumped irrational fears, right? But then came the flickering lights. They weren't supposed to do that. Fluorescent bulbs hanging overhead sputtered and dimmed, casting the hallway in waves of shadow and light. At first, it was just a brief stutter, a second-long hiccup that might have gone unnoticed under different circumstances, but then it happened again, and again. Each time, the darkness lingered longer, stretching out like molasses over the walls and floors. Now fully alert, I quickened my pace, weaving through the crowd of soundless figures. No one seemed to notice the disturbance, or perhaps they simply couldn't. Either way, their blank expressions unnerved me more than I cared to admit. Were they aware of what was happening? Could they hear the growing unease inside my own head? By the time I reached the shoe store, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, hoping the enclosed space would offer some relief from the creeping dread. Instead, I found myself face to face with another anomaly. The sales associate behind the counter was staring straight ahead, her mouth slightly agape. She blinked occasionally, but otherwise she remained motionless as if frozen mid-action. Her name tag read Lila, but Lila wasn't responding to my presence. Not that I blamed her, I probably looked like a lunatic standing there, wide-eyed and trembling. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice cracking. When she didn't react, I tried again, louder this time. "Hello?" Still nothing. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This couldn't be happening. None of it made sense. What had started as a mundane trip to the mall was quickly unraveling into a nightmare scenario straight out of a horror movie. Except this wasn't a movie, this was reality. My reality. And then it got worse. The realization hit me all at once, like a freight train barreling down the tracks. The people weren't ignoring me, they weren't there. Not really. They existed only as echoes of themselves, remnants of the world I once knew, and they were disappearing, one by one, leaving me alone in a sea of emptiness. It began with the smallest details. A woman pushing a stroller vanished mid-step, her cart rolling forward without guidance before coming to rest against a display window. A teenage boy texting on his phone faded into thin air, his glowing screen lingering for a split second before winking out entirely. Then came the larger groups clusters of friends laughing over coffee, families browsing through racks of clothing all vanishing simultaneously, leaving behind only the faintest whisper of their existence. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as wave after wave of disbelief crashed over me. How could this be possible? Where were they going? More importantly, why hadn't I gone with them? Desperation clawed at my throat as I darted from shop to shop, calling out names that no longer mattered. "Is anyone there?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the empty shelves and barren counters. "Please, someone answer me." No response, only silence. Time became distorted, minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps seconds masquerading as eternity. I lost track of how long I wandered those endless corridors, searching for answers that never came. The fluorescent lights continued their erratic dance, plunging entire sections of the mall into shadow before illuminating them once more. Shadows shifted unnaturally, stretching far beyond where they should have ended. Whispers carried through the air, though I couldn't place their source. Were they coming from the walls? The ceiling? My own fractured mind? In the midst of this chaos, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. Footprints. Fresh footprints leading away from the main entrance and deeper into the labyrinthine complex. They belonged to someone or something with bare feet, judging by the distinct imprints left behind. Following them became an obsession, a lifeline tethering me to sanity in a world gone mad. Each step brought me closer to the truth, though I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover it. The trail led me to the food court, where the scent of abandoned meals still lingered in the air. Half-eaten burgers sat untouched on trays, soda cups foaming over with fizz, chairs tilted precariously as if their occupants had been yanked abruptly from their seats. And yet, despite the evidence of recent activity, not a soul stirred. That's when I saw it, the figure sitting at the far end of the food court. Its posture was slumped, shoulders hunched forward as though bearing an immense weight. I hesitated, torn between approaching and fleeing. Curiosity won out, driving me forward despite every instinct screaming for me to run. As I drew nearer, the figure turned its head slightly, revealing a face obscured by shadows. Whatever it was, it didn't seem human. Eyes glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the flickering lights above. Its mouth opened, emitting a low, guttural growl that reverberated through my chest. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The creature tilted its head, studying me with unnatural intensity. Then, without warning, it pointed a bony finger directly at me. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, its voice gravelly and distorted. What do you mean? I demanded, taking an involuntary step backward. Where is everyone else? The creature chuckled a sound both hollow and menacing. Gone, all gone. Before I could press further, the ground beneath us trembled violently. Tables overturned, dishes shattered, and the air filled with a deafening roar. The creature disappeared in a flash of light, leaving me alone amidst the wreckage. When I came to, I was back at the entrance of the mall. The bright sunlight streaming through the windows told me it was still daytime, though how much time had passed since the incident was anyone's guess. Confusion overwhelmed me as I stared at the rows of cars parked outside, wondering if I'd imagined the entire ordeal. But then I noticed the date displayed on my phone. It was yesterday's date, yesterday. A chill ran down my spine as the implications sank in. Had I been caught in some sort of temporal anomaly? Was the mall somehow outside the flow of normal time? And if so, why was I spared while everyone else vanished? Over the following days, I returned to the mall repeatedly, hoping to find answers. Each visit yielded the same result: an empty shell devoid of life, save for the occasional glitch or distortion that hinted at forces beyond comprehension. The authorities dismissed my claims as delusions, chalking them up to stress or exhaustion, but I knew what I'd seen and heard. To this day, the mall remains abandoned. Rumors circulate about its strange history, tales of disappearances, and unexplained phenomena. Some say it's cursed. Others believe it serves as a gateway to another dimension. Me? I don't know what to think anymore. All I know is that I'll never set foot inside those walls again. Or will I? Because every night I dream of the creature's words, "You shouldn't be here." And every morning I wake up back at the entrance.
Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The secret without a name. The cold was biting, and the silence of Anchorage's streets at 2 a.m. felt unnatural. Amelia Mitchell pulled her coat tighter around herself as she hurried down a dimly lit sidewalk. The snow crunched under her boots, each step echoing in the stillness like an unwelcome intrusion. She shouldn't have been out here this late, but something about the call from Sophia Miller had made her stomach churn, a desperate voice pleading for help before the line went dead. Amelia's breath came out in visible puffs, quickening with every second that passed. Her gloved hands tightened around the strap of her bag as she turned onto Sophia's street. It was eerily empty, the kind of emptiness that didn't feel right even for a place buried deep in winter. Streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. The houses here were mostly dark, their windows staring blankly into the night, except for one. A faint light glowed behind closed curtains at the end of the block. That must be it, she thought, her heart pounding harder now. Sophia lived alone, always insisting she liked the quiet solitude of Anchorage winters. But tonight, there was no answer when Amelia knocked on the door. She tried again, louder this time, her knuckles rapping against the wood with urgency. "Sophia? Are you there?" Only silence greeted her, broken only by the distant hum of power lines swaying in the wind. She reached for her phone to call again, but just as her thumb hovered over the screen, she heard a faint creak from inside the house. It wasn't enough to dismiss as settling wood, it carried weight, purpose. Amelia hesitated, then pressed her ear closer to the door. Another sound followed, softer but unmistakable, shuffling footsteps, moving away from where she stood. "Sophia?" she called again, her voice trembling. No response. Just the oppressive silence pressing back against her words. Then, without warning, the doorknob began to turn slowly. So slowly, it seemed deliberate. Amelia stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the icy steps leading up to the porch. Her pulse roared in her ears as the door swung open wide, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. There was no one there, not immediately anyway. But as Amelia forced herself to peer inside, she noticed something odd, a trail of wet footprints leading further into the house. They weren't hers. They couldn't be. She hadn't stepped inside yet. And they weren't fresh either, not entirely. Some parts of the prints gleamed with melted snow, while others looked older, partially dried and smeared as if someone or something had walked through days ago but left traces that refused to fade. Against her better judgment, Amelia stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit her instantly, though it brought little comfort. Something about the air felt wrong, stale, heavy, as if it hadn't circulated properly in weeks. She glanced around the living room, taking in the familiar clutter of books and photographs scattered across shelves. Everything seemed normal, until she saw the photo frame lying face down on the coffee table. She picked it up cautiously, turning it over. It was a picture of Sophia smiling brightly next to Jackson Cole, her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, depending on who you asked. Their faces were scratched out violently, gouges cutting through the glass like angry scars. A chill ran down Amelia's spine. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had done this deliberately, methodically. Before she could process what it meant, another noise caught her attention, a low scraping coming from somewhere deeper in the house. It sounded like nails being dragged along a hard surface, slow and rhythmic, punctuated by pauses that somehow felt more menacing than the sound itself. Amelia swallowed hard, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? That she broke into her friend's house because of some creepy noises? They'd think she was crazy. Instead, she moved cautiously toward the hallway, following the sound despite every instinct screaming at her to leave. The hallway was narrow, lined with family portraits that seemed to watch her as she passed. Each frame held a face frozen in time, eyes staring ahead as if waiting for something. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar, light spilling out from within. The scraping grew louder, closer, and Amelia realized it was coming from behind that door. Her palms were slick with sweat beneath her gloves as she pushed it open just enough to peek inside. What she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. The room was small, cluttered with boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. In the center sat a chair, and on the chair was Sophia, or at least what remained of her. Her body slumped forward unnaturally, head hanging limp as if her neck couldn't support its weight anymore. Blood pooled beneath the chair, dark and congealed, staining the hardwood floor. But the worst part was her face, or rather, the absence of it. Where Sophia's features should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin stretched, taut over bone. Amelia gagged, stumbling backward as bile rose in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. Instead, she froze, transfixed by the sight before her. And then, from somewhere behind her, a voice spoke softly, almost kindly. "You shouldn't have come." She spun around, heart hammering wildly, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the portraits still staring silently ahead. Yet the voice lingered in her mind, repeating the same phrase over and over. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come." Amelia backed away, tripping over her own feet as she tried to retrace her steps toward the front door. But the layout of the house seemed different now, distorted somehow. Doors that hadn't been there before appeared in the walls, leading to rooms she didn't recognize. Shadows shifted unnaturally, twisting into shapes that defied logic. She could hear whispers now too, overlapping voices murmuring in tones too low to understand. Panic set in fully as she realized she was trapped. Every step she took led her deeper into the labyrinthine nightmare of Sophia's home. The air grew colder with each passing moment, frost creeping up the walls and forming intricate patterns on the ceiling. And always,